There's little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternalillusion update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer, barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story, nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. When you think of reincarnation, you think of happy childhoods, hyper-intelligent children who aren't actually children, jokes galore and smiles for days. At least, that's how it goes in the fanfics I've read. So you'll understand when I say nothing, even with foreknowledge, could have prepared me for the absolute fuck-up my life had become just an hour after my birth. Looking at it differently, I suppose it was obvious. I knew who my parents were. I also knew they were destined to die almost immediately following my birth. Before, well, whatever this could be called, there was an obvious detachment from the situation. Beyond the physical one of screen in person. I felt bad seeing it, sure. It's hard not to given what the story shows of Naruto's childhood and his parents' love for him. But at the end of the day, none of it was real. Naruto is a character created by the mind of a single man and his life unfolds between the covers of a manga. Or so I thought. Let me tell you this, though. There's little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Made even worse by the knowledge that the orchestrator of all this was the boy who was practically their surrogate son. No amount of rationalizing had helped the tsunami of grief, rage, and hatred. Not after they held me in their arms and looked at me with eyes filled with nothing but unconditional love, even as they condemned themselves to death. Nobody had looked at me like that before, talked about me like that before, of all the plans and hopes they had for me when I would be born. They were so damn hopeful about it that I really believed their plan would work. Until Obito held a kunai to my throat and ransomed me with my mother's life as the price. As much as I wish my father didn't, he chose to save me. Laid upon the altar of their sacrifice, I begged them to run. At least, I tried to form the words. Yelled until my throat was hoarse for them to leave me behind. I died before and wasn't afraid of dying again, but the smaller, calmer part of me knew that even if they could understand me, they wouldn't. And so, I watched my parents die on the night of Konoha's near destruction. Grief, a thick, chilling spike of a thing, ran my chest through. My throat burned, leaving me gasping like a fish for air. Tears pooled and blurred the world to my eyes. A pair of nimble hands slid beneath me and lifted me off my mother's quickly cooling corpse. It's all right now, Naruto. A soot-stained face smiled. Deep wrinkles trailed and dug weathered lines into his skin, joining the crinkle of his smile. He smelled of ash, smoke, and polished wood. I blinked up at his kind, dark eyes. I'll take care of you now. I promise. As it had for many others on that fateful night, everything crashed down in ceaseless destruction and death for Hiruzen Sarutobi. All within a single night. His wife, dead. His successor, dead. The village's Jinchuriki, dead. Leaving their infant son an orphan and the new host of the nine-tailed fox. Those damnable tales and ear-splitting roars would haunt his dreams for the scant years left of his life. Hiruzen leaned against his chair, surrounded on either side by mountains of paperwork weighed to his desk by numerous mission requests. What Minato was thinking, unfortunately, he would never know. He took a deep drag from his pipe and looked upon the village that had become the purpose of his existence since his wife died. The Nine Tails' path of destruction had at last begun to fade from the minds of the people, but as a village, they had barely recovered from the tragedy. Were it not for Minato and Kushina's sacrifice, the village would have ceased to exist that night. Still, they had certainly seen better days. The other hidden villages were no doubt plotting around the tragedy, and while he doubted war would be on the table, it did not mean that everything was peaceful in the elemental nations. Let alone the internal problems the village was facing. Every day, Hiruzen regretted his decision to let Danzo live. The attempt on his life aside, seeing Naruto live a miserable existence when he should, by all rights, be lauded as a hero was heartbreaking. And all because Danzo wished to take advantage of the boy's pain and create an emotionless weapon bound to his every beck and call. He expelled the hot smoke, slowly. Thick coils of misty white slipped between his lips. His shoulders sagged and relaxed, but the weight of his guilt remained. For his own sake, Naruto would remain blind to his status for now. For all its vaunted kindness, the leaf could be cruel. Yet they would be kinder than Naruto, were he to hold himself responsible for his parents' deaths. Their harsh words and glares would be nothing compared to the unimaginable cruelty of one's mind. Hiruzen could attest to that. The thought remained in his mind as he released the last puff of smoke and it followed him through the village until he reached the door of Naruto's home. As he usually did, Hiruzen knocked. Once, there was no reply. Regrettably, this was normal for them now. He knocked twice more before he heard scuttling behind the door. Come in, sir. He winced. The cold reply slipped beneath his robes and skewered him precisely in the center of his chest. Then, excuse me, Hiruzen entered the house, removing his shoes beforehand. He crossed the spotless floor, peering into the kitchen at the neatly organized dishes on the washing rack. You've been taking care of yourself, I see. Naruto rounded the corner and stared at him with unblinking blue eyes. Hiruzen struggled to maintain eye contact. How could he when he saw the faces of those he failed? And it was clear that he had failed Naruto too. I have to, sir, said Naruto. I live alone and I'm responsible for everything that happens to me. Now, can I get you anything to drink? Some tea? Coffee? I might have some orange juice in the fridge too. Tea would be nice, child. He stroked his beard, before adding, with milk. As Naruto busied himself in the kitchen, Hiruzen took the opportunity to inspect the one-bedroom apartment, starting with the living room. Like the rest of the house, it was almost devoid of anything personal. The blinds were down and the light from the television spilled across the room. It cast long, flickering shadows on the wall and ceiling. The tape of last year's Chunin exam was paused and a half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table between the sofa and screen. The bedroom, however, was even more impersonal than the living room. There were no posters on the walls, not of Lord Hashirama and Lord Tobirama, himself or Minato. There was nothing that would lead him to believe he was in the home of a young boy. The more he searched, the closer Naruto's home looked like that of a Chunin's. Every month since the start of the year, he searched to see if anything had changed. Especially given that he had recently joined the academy, Hiruzen had hoped that the presence of other children so close to him would help ease the grip of cold caution around his heart. Because evidently, he was not enough. The academy's first-year mandatory reading list stacked the bedside table, as well as what seemed to be a journal at the very bottom of the list. Hiruzen stopped there. While he had no problem looking through Naruto's home, he did not want to alienate the boy from him more so than he already was. The rattling whistle from the kitchen led Hiruzen back to the living room. He took a seat at the dining table just before the walkout balcony overlooking the village. Naruto entered with a tray, carrying a teapot, 2 mugs, and a dozen biscuits. It was an odd food combination, all things considered, and not one Hiruzen had encountered until he started visiting Naruto. That being said, it had grown on him. So, how are you finding the academy so far? He asked between bites. It's interesting, but not as interesting as I had hoped. How so? If I had to divide the 8-hour school day, we spend 2 hours towards the end of the day sparring and training, with the rest being split equally between mathematics, history, and teaching us how to read and write. Do you not think reading and writing are important skills for a shinobi? I don't think listening to the same question being asked 3 times in a row is important for a shinobi. A fair point, Hiruzen chuckled, but it will be good for you, being around children your age that is. Will it? I don't think so because, and I say this at the risk of stating the obvious, people don't like me very much. At the reminder of Naruto's poor social status, he fought to not recoil as another one of his blunders reared its head again. Okay, he sighed. If you're so smart, I'll ask you a question. You have 4 tries to figure it out. If you get it right, you can ask me one question of your own. Any question? Naruto asked. Hirazen's heart almost shattered at the doubt laced in the voice, at the stuttering hesitance, at the child whom he saw in equal light to Konohamaru looking at him how he did, speaking to him how he did. At the implication that Naruto did not trust him to be truthful. Yet despite the pain, he knew he only had himself to blame. Any question, he repeated, gentler this time. Before his eyes, the caution dissolved a little, just barely enough that Hiruzen noticed it, and the sight gave him hope that his relationship with the boy was not unsalvageable. Naruto adjusted his position, elbows propped in front of him as he leaned over the table. All right, hit me. Very well, Hiruzen smiled. What has 4 legs, a body, yet cannot walk? A riddle? I thought you'd ask me a mathematics question, or one about some weird historical fact. When did I say so? Why, do you want me to give you a clue? Naruto chewed his bottom lip for a moment. Any drawbacks to this clue? One less guess. Do you still want it? At his nod of agreement, Hiruzen said, it's in this very room with us. Immediately the child's eyes fell to the tray, scanning its contents. Then, he looked left and right. The sofa? Not quite the object I was thinking of, but you're not wrong. He clicked his tongue and returned to searching. A minute passed, during which Naruto scarfed down 2 biscuits, chewing them intensely. The coffee table? He frowned. Hiruzen grinned, a small snort escaping him. I said that the clue to the answer is in the room with us, not the answer itself. So did I get it wrong? No. Hiruzen waved his hands. The answer is correct. Naruto clenched his fists and laughed softly to himself. I knew it. Well done, Naruto. He sat back and smiled, placing his hands in his lap. What would you like to know? Naruto frowned and clenched his jaw. I want to know what's so special about me, sir. What do you mean? You visit me every month. Just me. There are so many orphans in the village, but I'm the only one you personally give their stipend. Why? And there was the crux of the matter. Hiruzen shrunk back at the pleading light in Naruto's eyes. He could not tell Naruto the truth. Not yet, but if he were to lie to him, the scant bit of trust he managed to build over the last half an hour would burn to ash. Unfortunately, his duty as Hokage superseded his guilt. You certainly don't ask easy questions, said Hiruzen. As for your monthly stipend, what can I say? You are a special boy. He eked out a laugh, reaching to ruffle his hair. Unconcealed hurt flashed across Naruto's face and Hiruzen's hand froze halfway across the table. The distance between them felt far greater. All right then, he reached within the folds of his robes and slid the wad of note across the table. Here's your monthly stipend, make sure it lasts. He turned to leave as fast as possible, swallowing thickly as the door slammed behind him. The setting sun's orange and purple hues lit the sky. Nebulous, dark clouds curved around the village while looming shadows crept after Hiruzen. Their cries of, have a good evening, or, hello, Lord Hokage, fell on deaf ears. He was locked in conflict with his guilt. It was a raging sea storm, with waves that rose and crashed against his flimsy resolve. Like he would a dinghy, all he could do was hold firm against its cracked wooden edges, praying that it remained steadfast. He cursed Danzo's name again. It felt hollow to him, though. Danzo may have been the one responsible for the villagers ostracizing the boy, but the blame for Naruto's ignorance landed squarely on his shoulders. But as per usual, Hiruzen would lament. He would suffer in silence, perhaps even break out a case of sake if it became too much to bear sober. Because Naruto could not know the truth, not yet. And if that meant taking all of the boy's enmity onto himself, then so be it. Hiruzen had done, and would continue to do, grislier things for the sake of the village. Chapter 1.2.2. Published by Web Novel. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternal update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer, barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. I'm used to being alone. Not in the super edgy, I hate company kind of way, though. Loneliness has simply become a part of my life, not a constant companion, but more like a visitor, one I stopped trying to keep away. You see, I'd simply grown numb to the villagers veering their children away from me when I pass by in the street. Or on the better days, when I'm completely ignored. Don't get me wrong, I'm well aware that the way they treat me is horrendous, but as much as I want to, I can't hate them. Not when I understand exactly what they feel and why they feel it. Regardless, I'm the one who receives their glares and muttered curses and that makes me angry. Because while they might not know the true culprit behind their grief, I do. There are vicious cycles, and then there is the hell that is my existence in the hidden leaf. Sometimes, I wonder if it's the Ninetales' fault. That maybe, he's manipulating me and nurturing my hatred for his own benefit. But then I remember the spray of blood and the huge ivory nail running my parents through and the possibility burns to ash. No, my hatred for Obito and the Ninetales is definitely mine. The Ninetales manipulating me, though, is a whole other can of worms. After a nightmare a few years back, I went through a period of second-guessing my every thought. Even now, despite knowing Dad's seal is airtight, there's a small voice in my head terrified of the possibility. I'm used to being alone, which is what scares me the most. In a handful of years, I've turned into someone who I don't recognize sometimes. Then, I'm left staring at the mirror, wondering when I changed. I'd like to say I know the exact moment it happened, but truth be told, I've got no idea. My faith in genuine human kindness hasn't quite bottomed out yet, mostly thanks to Mr. Tucci and Ayame. See, I didn't know exactly how attention-starved I was until I decided to visit Ichiraku Ramen for the first time, a given when one finds oneself reborn in Konoha. One visit became 2, 3, and then 4, until I was going there daily. Hell, I blew almost all my stipend on it a couple of years back. Not the wisest decision, I know, but the food was worth it and thanks to that, Mr. Tucci offered me a job. I was pretty skeptical at first, given my age, but it really wasn't anything too difficult. Mostly, my job's to shadow Mr. Tucci, and Ayame when she's around, and do whatever I'm told to. In other words, washing equipment and prepping ingredients. Neither allow me anywhere near the actual cooking no matter how many times I swear that I know my way around a kitchen. All in all, against the grim backdrop of my childhood, those two have made for some of the brightest memories of my life. A small grin swept the frown off my face as I trailed through the empty streets. Well, relatively empty. Konoha is a fairly early rising place where people either produce stuff for a living or sell things from people who do. Case in point, Ichiraku Ramen. Despite being open for a few decades now, it's a small restaurant that can seat about 6 people at a time, so most take their food to go. Ayame and Mr. Tucci live above the shop but spend more time downstairs than they do up. The morning freeze seeped through my jacket and trousers, chilling me to the bones. Though winter wasn't quite in full swing yet, so it hadn't begun snowing. Still, I could see the white sheen over the grass and the fogged windows of houses as I walked through the village. I entered the shop through the back, making sure to lock the door behind me. My eyes tingled at the heat in the room and I immediately shrugged off my jacket, straining to hang it up on the rack behind the door. A light voice chuckled at my misfortune. You're not tall enough for that yet, Naruto. Ayame, I looked over my shoulder, voice strained. Would you please help me out instead of judging me from across the room? She snorted and took the jacket out of my hands. Thank you. Dad's in the middle of making some ramen broth, but we've got last night's leftovers in the fridge if you want them. Unfortunately, there's no miso, but there's tonkatsu and salt. Which one do you want? I'll have scrambled eggs instead, please. We moved into the kitchen where Mr. Tucci stood over 4 boiling pots with a mesh sieve in one hand. Every so often, he would scoop the scum off the top of each pot and empty it into the sink. I guess he can hear us over the sound of the bubbling pots, which was good for me. I made a beeline to the other stove, but before I could go any further, Ayane steered me away. I fought to break out of her grip for a few seconds and she laughed. Nope, not today, kid. Really? I sighed when she smirked. No, really? I can't even do that. It's scrambled eggs. It won't even take me longer than 5 minutes to make. She opened the latch separating the restaurant's kitchen and dining area and ushered me out. You will take a seat and I will make you breakfast. Go do some homework or something while you wait. Already done it all, I muttered, mostly to myself. With the morning cold at my back and the kitchen's warmth at my front, I watched as Mr. Tucci tossed a whole onion, about 2 cloves of garlic, and a ginger stick into each pot. Eventually, when he had placed a lid over each pot, he noticed me. Oh, he wiped his hands on his apron. Hello there, Naruto. Would you like me to make you a bowl for breakfast? No thank you, I smiled. Ayane's making me some eggs. Speaking of eggs, Ayane glided across the kitchen with a steaming plate balanced carefully beneath a towel on the palm of her hand. She slid a fork across the table. Here you go. I muttered a brief thanks and dug into my food, mood quickly plummeting in the face of the school day ahead. Not only that, but after Itachi went and butchered the Uchiha clan last month, the Konoha Council, in other words, the ex-members of Team Tobirama, decided to put an end to letting kids graduate early on grounds of, and I quote, emotional instability. I suppose it makes sense if you squint your eyes. Kakashi is an emotional wreck of a man who tried to kill himself through a blaze of high-rank missions and, well, Itachi killed his entire clan save for Sasuke. But that's ignoring the fact that they were capable shinobi who were forced to dance to the tune of the powers that be. It's not all too bad, though. There's nothing difficult to do since I find most things on the academic side a breeze. History is actually interesting too, at least when I put aside the blatant propaganda against enemy villages. The sting of onion filled my nose as Ayame snapped her fingers in my face. Huh? I wiped the thin film of tears out of my eyes. Dad was wondering how you find the physical side of the academy. Don't say like that. He'll think I'm doubting him, Mr. Tucci admonished her. What I meant was that back in my day, the academy was faster paced, so I was curious if they changed how they teach you things. I can see that, I nodded. It's not anything too difficult, to be honest. We spar every week and do something physical daily, but right now, the focus is bringing everyone up to standard, so lots of running. For those of us with decent stamina, they've started us on flexibility and complex obstacle courses. No kunai or shuriken training yet? That's after the winter break. Most of the class can't even do the basic academy taijutsu style properly yet. Hell, we're not even doing anything chakra related until summer. You know, it's things like this that have me appreciate the shaky piece we got right now. Really? Not so long ago, children entered the academy and graduated as full-fledged shinobi in no more than 3 years before being immediately shoved onto the battlefield. His eyes almost glazed over before he pulled himself out of the reverie. But do your best, Naruto. Just because we're in a time of peace, doesn't mean it will remain peaceful forever. I blinked away the image of a swirling orange mask and the crimson eye burning behind it. I know, Mr. Tucci. He smiled and passed me my coat. Good lad, now get out of here. You'll be late if you hang around any longer. See you after school, I smiled and zipped it up. Ayane stuck her head out of the stall's blinds and waved me up the street. Have a nice day. When I really think about it, it takes a special kind of caution to willingly curb your own progress. Both by accepting that I was in for a long 6 years and that I wouldn't be able to use the shadow clone jutsu to make things easier. Nope, that's bullshit. There's just no way for me to realistically get my hands on a forbidden jutsu guarded by Enbu. I don't care that Canon Naruto did it. I'm not going to play games with my life or hinder my progress onto a team that would fit my disposition just to get it. I'm not so close to the third Hokage anymore either. He still comes by to visit, but our conversations are stilted. He stopped making efforts to bridge that gap and I just stopped caring. Why should I? I tossed him an olive branch, a helping hand, a goddamn lifeboat that he decided to throw back in my face. There are other ways to get my hands on it. Maybe I do well on a mission and get to ask for a reward or bring it up to my Jonin sensei. I huffed explosively, slightly picking up the pace of my run. My thoughts flitted from the shadow clone jutsu to Ichiraku ramen to the complicated frown on Aruka's face every time our eyes met. The rhythmic thud of footsteps and labored breaths followed me as I jogged around the track. Sasuke was close behind, his pale face red and slick with sweat. Kiba lagged just barely behind him, neck and neck more often than not, and over the gulf was a cluster of people spread across the track. In no time at all, I lapped Choji, who looked dead on his feet. During the winter, the physical portion of the school day is moved to the morning. According to Aruka, it's supposed to warm us up and get us energized for the day ahead. When he called it to an end, I was sweaty, but no worse for wear. I could probably have gone for another hour or so too. We trailed back into the classroom, cutting across the track field. Goddamn it, Kiba grunted, taking a swig from his water bottle. I'll beat you one of these days, Uzumaki. I snorted. Beat Sasuke first, then set your sights on more. I'll definitely beat him, Kiba huffed, and then I'll leave you in the dust. Sasuke turned around and scowled at me. I sighed and shrugged my shoulders. Kiba doubled down. Yeah, I said it, Uchiha. I'm going to beat you one of these days. Sasuke deepened his frown and marched into the classroom. Kiba followed, probably angry at his dismissal. I shrugged again and walked to my seat, relieved. The trick to dealing with kids is to divert their attention, and I've neither the patience nor the mind to deal with my classmates all day long. Thankfully, I'm not the center of attention in the classroom, beyond when my teachers make me. That honor goes to Sasuke. I snorted and pulled my notepad and pen out of my bag, reviewing last week's notes. Quickly, a grimace crawled across my face. I crossed a line through a misspelled word and rewrote the correct one top. Learning how to read and write will always be a pain, especially since Japanese is so far removed from English. It's not the most difficult thing in the world, or it wouldn't be, if not for the constant suspicion of sabotage I have to carry with me at school. The teacher, a chunin called Fujino, is an anomaly where my teachers are concerned. My mathematics teacher, for instance, is dead set on somehow making sure I can't properly learn multiplication, and my history teacher is an overzealous marker who treats me as if I pump out academic grade work. But Fujino completely breaks away from the norm. It's been a little over a month at the academy and I still don't know if she's teaching me wrong. Nothing about her suggests it. There's no visible enmity when she speaks to me. She doesn't one-sidedly zero in on any perceived misbehavior like Aruka does either. After a while, my suspicion wore away. But there are moments when I think twice because blindly trusting her could screw me over big time. The class around me settled down as Fujino entered the room. She had waist-length purple hair and warm brown eyes framed by circular red glasses. Bundled within her arms was a stack of paper, last week's tests. Good morning everyone, she beamed. As promised, I've marked your tests. The apprehension in the room was heavy in the air. She giggled. Don't be like that. The punishment for failing isn't that bad. You'll be staying behind after school for a month to work on your reading and writing skills, okay? Gliding around the room, she handed back each paper with either a smile or a conciliatory pat on the arm alongside a slightly smaller smile. Naruto, she looked at me over her glasses. Well done. Keep going and you'll be writing pages of work in no time. I glanced over my paper, feeling a swell of pride. This is the one subject I genuinely had to try it, and to see my effort rewarded definitely felt good. Fujino moved on swiftly, breaking the bad news to an already tuckered out Choji. Hey, Naruto, a voice sounded from the row above me. I looked up at a civilian kid, Taro, I think his name was. What's up? Why is your wrong answer marked as right? Wrong answer? I glanced down at my paper and then back at Taro. Hold on, mind passing me your paper for a sec? Taro shrugged. Sure. I placed Taro's paper beside mine, and even used my deskmates to verify. Barely able to stop myself from snapping, I returned the papers and glared at Fujino from across the room. That little, I dug my hands into my thighs. A very large part of me wanted to march up to the bitch and rip her a new one, but that would see me kicked out of class before I could really get going, and if I complained to her, she could throw up whatever bullshit reason she wanted. But if I were to take it to another teacher, she could straight up lie and call me a horrible student. I felt a hot burn in the back of my throat as she laughed at something Ino had said. The harder I puzzled over it, the more I realized Fujino had thought this thing through. If I really were a child, she would have destroyed the best opportunity I had to learn to read and write. And for what? Grief displaced on a 7-year-old? Some kind of sadistic perversion? My pulse thundered in my head. There was no questioning that I'd make her pay. I just had to be smart about it. And while I'm no Shikamaru, I can be cunning when I need to be. Chapter 1.3.3. Published by Web Novel. The Cycle of Hatred. A Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server. https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon. https://www.patreon.com/eternal update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer. Barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story, nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. There was a chill in the air, a distinctly sharp hint of danger. Its possibility rested on a knife's edge, where a tip in any direction would spell catastrophe. She couldn't quite manage to rest. Oh, she could fall asleep, but would wake not too long afterwards, every instinct buzzing in the back of her skull. Something was wrong, but what exactly that was danced outside her grasp. She lay perfectly still in the darkness of their bedroom, despite her glasses lying on the bedside table, just beside his. She could barely make out the countless ridges and bumps running across the ceiling. The mattress sank under the weight of a rumbling snore. She rolled over, but not too fast, else the bed would groan with the anguish of 1,000 souls. Nose to his back, she slipped her arms around his torso. She hoped his warmth would bring some much-needed calm. The steady beat of his heart warded off the strange sting in the air. Before she knew it, her shallow breaths matched his, until it didn't. He stiffened, grunting as he sat up. She forced her eyes open. What is it, Junpei? Fujino, this chakra, it's way too large to be human. It's almost like. His voice was completely dominated by the deafening blare of the civil defense siren. An electrical jolt coursed down her spine, both energizing and terrifying. Moments later, she stood facing her husband, worry reflected on his face. He frowned as he pulled his sheath over his back, fastening it. His lips parted, unsaid words shimmering in his eyes before his head snapped behind him. Junpei pulled back the blind, revealing a masked shinobi. Anbu, Fujino's mind supplied. From the slender figure, they were a woman. Her long purple hair fell behind and around the pale, feline mask. He opened the window. Jonin Kikuchi, you have orders to join Lord Third at the base of Hokage Mountain. She turned to Fujino. Shunin Shimizu, your orders are to aid in the evacuation efforts and then join the battle. Her heart pulsed. She glanced at Junpei. Horror had flushed the blood from his face and his eyes remained rooted to the window. Swallowing, Fujino asked, what's the fight? The Anbu was silent for a moment. The Nine Tails has escaped its seal. The words passed through her, tearing her heart out. Suddenly, too suddenly, her flak jacket felt light. The tools and weapons concealed within would be completely useless. When she had gathered enough of her fear-jolted mind to process the here and now, the Anbu was gone. Junpei growled, grabbing a fistful of his black hair. What the hell am I supposed to do against a goddamn tail beast? Fujino reached a shaking hand towards his shoulder. He blinked, and then his face fell as if he had only realized that she was still there. Shit, he said. The world shimmered. Fujino smiled wetly, not bothering to wipe away the frustrated tears. Ever the optimist, Junpei was quick to rein in his fear, hiding it behind a quick grin. But she saw through it. She always did, no matter how well he hid it. I reckon this might go better than I think, he said as he rubbed his shoulder. Everyone above Tokubetsu Jonin will go and fight the Nine Tails with Lord Third. Not terrible odds, right? Fujino didn't agree. She wanted to tell him how felt, how afraid she was that she would find him, hours later, his body mauled and broken. Or how he might find her. But with those green eyes boring into her, she couldn't bring herself to move the words up her throat. Because doing so would force her to admit that she could lose him. Be safe was all she could manage. Junpei sighed with a fond smile. Be safe is all you can manage, huh? Where's your declaration of undying love? Better yet, where's my good luck kiss? At that, she smiled. Like I told you on your first day rank, come back alive and I'll give you all the kisses you want. They shared a brittle laugh. The room fell silent again, but not with fear. She focused on a single nostril, pulling in all the air her lungs could hold, and expelled it in a long, drawn-out breath. Despite the fear clamped around her lungs, her mind was as sharp as ever. The muted instincts buried under her relaxation had come to the surface. Her chakra answered the call, its familiar heat banishing the block of ice lodged within her chest. In an instant, they were on the roof. The Nine Tails' roars were louder than even the siren. One swing and it leveled the northwestern side of the village. Towering apartments were cold like blades of grass. Dozens of bodies cut through the air, with dozens more flitting across the village towards the beast. Hey. Fujino flinched. I'll be back soon, Junpei said with damp resignation in his eyes. He nodded once and his resolve hardened. Prioritize the children but don't ignore the others. As cynical as it sounds, we're going to need a lot more shinobi after this. A sickly tendril wormed across her heart, but Junpei was right. For each shinobi that would die tonight, another would take their place. This was what life in a hidden village was like in all its glory. All she could do was hope that the genin were strictly forbidden from anything but evacuation attempts. She blinked and Junpei was gone, leaving the ghost of his smile behind, alongside the promise of his return. Whether or not he would fulfill that promise, she didn't know. She had her duties and he had his, and as shinobi of the hidden leaf, they were contractually bound to fulfill them. Her lungs burned, tears that had long since dried lined her face, but she couldn't stop, not now. Slung across her back was a sleeping child. He had screamed until he was hoarse, fighting her every step of the way until exhaustion had claimed his tortured consciousness. The sight of his parents brutalized across the remainder of their home was not one she would forget anytime soon. Nothing she had seen tonight would leave her mind. She winced. Orphan children, childless parents, grieving husbands, widowed wives. Fujino thought the end of the Third War was bad, but this, the sheer amount of senseless death, it trumped any mass funeral she had attended in her childhood. She leapt from roof to roof. Her bird's eye view of what was once a bustling village, teeming with life, had been thoroughly ripped apart by the claws and tails of a monster. She passed the street where Mr. Banri would pull his taiyaki cart. A few blocks away, genin pulled sobbing children away from the quickly cooling corpses of their parents. The apartment block rumbled, and she wasn't even able to cry a warning before it collapsed atop those too slow to avoid the falling concrete. She watched, helpless, as a genin abandoned the elderly man she was carrying, leaping away from the descending rubble. Fujino cursed, turning away. She had seen enough death tonight. The weight on her back stirred. She sighed but maintained her speed. The faster she got to the orphanage, the better it would be for the both of them. His hot breath spread across her ear, but the words chilled her to the bone. It wasn't a nightmare. All his choked sobs made it past the blaring siren, chipping away at her soul. A haggard woman stood watch at the orphanage's front gate with dozens of children assembled around her. The younger ones were crying into the legs of children not much older than themselves. She swallowed the cold, dead remains of her heart. Miss Shinobi, the matron asked. Another child? Fujino nodded, wordlessly releasing the little boy. He stared at her with soul-crushingly empty eyes. Why did you save me? He asked, voice quiet enough that only she could hear him. Why didn't you save Ma and Pa? I. She scrambled for an answer. He took one last look at her and slipped into the small crowd. That wretched howl raked its claws through her. Fujino shook her legs out. She had more than enough chakra left to join the fight. Enough chakra to carve out a pound of flesh for the dead families she'd had the misfortune of encountering. Making a few shaky hand signs, she flickered to the orphanage rooftop and took off. She registered a blur in her peripheral vision and slowed down. A vestige shinobi pulled up beside her. We've orders to join the fight. Head to the eastern exit. She nodded. It's about time we avenge the innocents that monster has killed. Damn right, the Chunin growled, vanishing in a burst of speed. Fujino stopped and laughed weakly. It was a hollow lie. The truth was, she was sick and tired of seeing people die for no reason at all. Of seeing the viscera of helpless civilians, unable to lift a finger against that which wanted them dead. At least there was more purpose in her existence confronting the thing responsible. She gazed forlornly at the nine tails and the countless ant-like figures swatted aside by its writhing tails. Somewhere in that direction, her husband was fighting, and at long last, she could join him. The thought alone warmed the raw wound that her heart had become. Death had come, shrouding the village in a menacing light. They stood in a ring of fire, caged with a beast that had turned their home into a graveyard. For close to an hour, the village's shinobi had fought, every single jutsu imaginable hurled at the gargantuan beast's hide. One by one, they were ripped apart by its tails, scattered across the raised village, or slammed against the masses of shinobi crowding it. To them, it was a life or death battle, a struggle for survival. For the tailed beast, it was nothing but a game. Fujino could see it, even in the face of her imminent death, she could see it. Its unsettlingly human-like eyes flashed with perverse glee like it could taste the fear heavy in the air. The abyssal orb stretching its maw continued to grow, forcing the nine tails further and further outside of the village's eastern walls. Not that there were any walls left to break. Fujino was teetering dangerously close to chakra exhaustion. Her weapons were lost in the vast masses of orange fur, save for the single kunai clenched in her quivering hands. This is it, a Chunin muttered nearby. He might have been a Jonin for all she knew. In front of the walking disasters known as tailed beasts, there was no difference between Genin, Chunin, and Jonin. Fuck, a young-sounding man yelled. This can't be how we go out. We never even had a chance against it. The sound of weapons clattering to the ground followed one after the other. The nine tails' blood-red eyes curved up at the sight. The sides of its lips twitched into a manic grin. Fujino's fingers twitched. Was there any point in raising her weapon? It would do nothing, just as the slew of her fire-release jutsu had done nothing. Her grip slid to the very bottom of the hilt, the rest of the weapon swinging back and forth. Her flickering resolve followed each swing of the kunai. It swung right. The mourning cries of dozens of children punished her for her cowardice. Her face twisted at a pain felt deeper than the throbbing ache in her tired limbs. It swung left. Her swimming vision cleared, taking in the monstrous glory of a tailed beast bomb. If good fortune was with her, Fujino would have never seen it in her lifetime. From the very little she had read, a single one would turn the entirety of the Hidden Leaf village into a smoking crater. With a choking gasp, she surrendered her weapon and her will to fight, shutting her eyes tight in wait for what she could only hope to be a painless death. Shinobi of the Hidden Leaf, Lord Third boomed. Hear me. Fujino looked behind her. Lord Third, caked in debris and blood, was perched atop a demolished roof, resting against his famed adamantine staff. Her childhood had been filled with stories of his famed exploits as the god of shinobi, but this night, tragic as it was, had kindled a newfound respect for the former Hokage. An hour against the nine-tailed fox and he had cast nothing but the highest-ranked elemental jutsu. He was the sole reason that the vast majority of them had survived so far, Fujino included. Momentarily taking her eyes off him, she chewed her bottom lip in worry. The brief reprieve from her still imminent death brought a worrying thought to mind. Where was Junpei? She hadn't seen a single trace of him in the battle, not the telltale howl of his wind-released jutsu, nor had she heard his incessant habit of yelling the name of his jutsu over his lungs. Not once. Tonight, you stand against insurmountable odds, braved by our village's first and greatest Hokage, Hashirama Senju. All is not yet lost. Raise your weapons and look forward. Vast torrent of chilling air swept across the village. It took all she had and more to stand her ground, digging her heels in deep. Blinding garnet light slipped between her raised arms. The earth itself thrashed under the nine tails attack. Panic-filled screams and harsh curses exploded forth all around her. Fujino shrieked out a hurried prayer to whatever god would hear her. Her only wish was to be reunited with Junpei in the Pure Lands. When the pressure on her eyelids receded, she hesitantly blinked them open to a hazy golden barrier. What happened? Are we dead? Fujino slowly reached a probing finger towards the barrier. Minuscule ripples flooded around her finger. She tracked swirling paths on the face of the barrier, squinting through its golden light. She leapt back at the earth-shattering howl from the other side. Just as each of you must protect the village and its inhabitants, Lord Third smiled, walking up to the barrier. The Hokage has a duty of care to their shinobi. Now, please stand back, everyone. I may no longer wear the hat, but I am still the Hidden Leaf's third Hokage. He stumbled back, ashen-faced. Minato. He raised his staff, slamming it against the barrier. It shuddered once, pulsing. A stuttering light surged across it. He slammed the barrier again, but it remained strong. He's keeping us out, Lord Third growled as his staff vanished in a puff of smoke. He slammed his bare fists against the barrier. Minato. Fujino retreated, Lord Third's cries growing distant. Her feet felt weightless. She drifted across the ruined remains of the eastern gate. Her eyes scanned the corpses of deceased shinobi with desperate ferocity. The pit in her stomach grew at every unfamiliar face she saw. One at a time, the corpses mounted, with Junpei nowhere to be found. It was not until hours later that she found his mutilated body at Konoha Hospital. Her feet would not move. Her eyes remained fixed on his unnaturally pale face, his unmoving lips and those closed green eyes that would never open again. Junpei would never wake again. Her mind, no, her being itself, simply shut down in the face of that reality. Years later, she still had not fully moved on, not mentally or physically. More than 5 years after the fact, Fujino still lived in the same home. In their home. Their pictures were mounted in the entry hallway and framed in her bedroom. Her tired purple eyes flickered over to his bright grin. She sipped from a mug of coffee. Over the last few hours, she had made a sizable dent in her marking. The third and second years had been finished hours ago and only half of the first years remained. She slid the marked paper onto the pile of completed first-year essays and pawned a new one. Seeing the name at the top of the next paper made her pause. Naruto Uzumaki, she muttered. A storm of emotions roiled within her. Fear, not of the boy, but what he could become. No, what the nine tails could become. He was smart, smarter than any child she had seen. What she was afraid of was what the nine tails could become with the knowledge he would acquire. The village could not take another slaughter. She could not take another slaughter, not after she had barely cobbled together the remains of her life. Fujino began to mark his paper. Each slightly misspelled word that she encountered and credited twisted a chilling knife into her chest. No matter her feelings about his circumstances, she could admit that Naruto gave nothing but his best efforts in her class. Not just her class, but every class in the academy. But where she should feel pride, she felt the distant prickle of fear, of danger. The same chill in the air she felt on that night. Her training as a shinobi ward with her choices. Her integrity as a teacher ward with her choices. The memory of Junpei ward with her choices. Frowning, Fujino continued. She hadn't completely botched his chances at learning proper reading and writing skills, she tried to tell herself. Only enough that he would begin to doubt his prodigious capability. Only enough that he would not reach full bloom. He could still become a resourceful shinobi. She snorted derisively. The words didn't even have to be verbalized to feel void to her. Regardless, she continued, because the alternative would mean accepting the distinct possibility of danger once again. That, she refused to do. Chapter 1.44. Published by Web Novel. The Cycle of Hatred. A Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternal update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer, barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. With the winter break steadily approaching and the academy settling into a routine schedule, I found the days whizzing by. They were a blend of boredom and brief moments of curiosity amidst a hail of biting wind and infrequent snow. I say boredom because nothing of note had happened since discovering Fujino's sabotage. Classes ran as usual, with me zoning out during everything but her classes and sparring. I leaned back against the bench, releasing a slow, quiet yawn. My eyes tingled and I swallowed another yawn as I looked out of the window. The barest pinkish hues of sunlight stretched over the bleak, gray sky. Homeroom had come to a close. The room exploded into noise as Aruka closed the sliding door behind him. I could see almost everything and everyone from the back of the layered classroom. A small crowd of eager-eyed girls had formed around Sasuke, with another crowd of jealous boys glaring at him. I shook my head with a smile. Well over a month now, closer to 2, and you'd think the fixation would die down on both sides. Maybe the mysterious allure of him being the last Uchiha is something irresistible to a child's mind. Not that I'd be one to know. The rustle of packaging crinkled beside me, followed by a sharp crunch. I turned with a raised eyebrow more amused than anything else. Choji? The round-faced boy paused mid-bite, pulling the untouched morsel from the depth of his mouth. You understand that it's only 9 in the morning, right? He nodded. Did you have breakfast? He nodded again. I scratched my cheek, thinking of a way to word this that wouldn't set him off. For all his gentleness, even insinuating that he was fat would upset Choji for at least an hour. I guess you must be hungry then. He frowned at me, suspicion in his brown eyes. He clutched the bag of crisps closer to his chest. What's it to you, Naruto? Relax, bud, I'm not going to steal your food. He nodded, almost to himself, and popped it back into his mouth. Good, do you want some? I stared at the outstretched bag and tilted my head. Why not? When our history teacher walked in, I was working on dislodging the remains of the spicy flavored crisps from my teeth. The classroom plummeted into silence. Mizubayashi wasn't the sort who'd stand for any foolishness on that front. His words, not mine. He opened a notebook and settled behind the podium, scribbling a question on the blackboard. The class moved on at a snail's pace. Mizubayashi started with a quiz before launching into what I can only describe as a lecture on the establishment of the strange civilian council sessions that Lord Third holds each month. It was interesting, at first anyway. I had always wondered why he did so when the Hidden Leaf's pretty much an autocracy, at least on paper. But then it veered in a direction I didn't care for. For the vast majority of the lesson, I skipped ahead in the textbook and read up on Tobirama Senju who, despite his questionable actions regarding the Uchiha, was arguably the best Hokage this village had ever seen. I felt a pang of longing alongside a thrum of frustration. Dad would have probably been the best Hokage in the village to date. If nothing else, he was taking steps to solve the decades-long Uchiha dilemma. Mizubayashi clapped his hands. Right, to finish, we'll take a look at something very fundamental to our village's existence in preparation for next week. We've covered it in passing but we're going into detail today. Now, who wants to tell me what the Will of Fire is? Sakura's arm shot past her pink hair. The Will of Fire is the founding belief of our village. We use our love for our family and friends as motivation to defend ourselves from our enemies. If we lose the Will of Fire, we'll turn to evil and hatred. Perfectly summarized, Sakura. Mizubayashi smiled and began to pace about in front of the blackboard. The Will of Fire is universal. That means the same for everyone, in Konoha. It goes beyond the divide between shinobi and civilians. We all feel love for our family and friends. We all care for neighbors and everyone who helps the Hidden Leaf keep moving, right? He nodded at the chorus of yeses. The Will of Fire, as Sakura says, is keeping that love in mind in everything we do. Remember who and what you're training for, and when you go out on missions, who you're fighting for. Jun? But the whole village, sir? I can't imagine the whole village. Mizubayashi chuckled. Neither can I, but you can imagine your family and friends, can't you? Yeah. Keep them in mind. Your friends and family live in the village too. So when you fight for your friends and family, you fight for the village as well. It's something you can take pride in. Jun stumbled over his words. I still don't understand, sir. Don't worry, you might not understand it, but you feel it and live it. You came here to be a shinobi, which means the Will of Fire burns within you. If not today, then you'll understand one day. Someone else raised their hand. Sir, do other hidden villages have the Will of Fire too? There was a round of laughter that Mizubayashi took part in. He raised a hand to put an end to it with a smile. No, Tatsuya, the other hidden villages don't have the Will of Fire. It's why they might be possessed by greed, like the Hidden Cloud, who are famous for stealing bloodlines. But we have the Will of Fire, passed on to us by Hashirama Senju, who put an end to an era of warring clans and barbarity. So long as we keep those we care for close to our hearts, we won't fall to hatred and greed like the other villages. A few more questions flew across the classroom. Some weren't the smartest while others were thought-provoking. Mizubayashi's answer to Tatsuya left a bad taste in my mouth. He twisted Hashirama Senju's hopes for genuine understanding among people into propaganda. Not just him, but people like Tobirama Senju, Danzo, and even Lord Third as well, which brought a pretty controversial question to mind. Part of me wanted to know the answer to that question, but another reveled in the tight spot it would corner the Chunin into. I chewed my tongue for a bit before tentatively raising my hand. Mizubayashi nodded. Sir, what if the people you love and fight for one day become enemies of Konoha? What then, would we lose the Will of Fire? He tilted his head. Mind explaining what you mean? I swallowed. This was going to be bad, but what the hell, not like there's any guilt stopping me. Take Orochimaru. He was one of the legendary Sannin. He almost became the 4th Hokage at one point. But he betrayed the village. Doesn't caring for him, no matter who he was before, mean you go against the Will of Fire? Now, I don't know about it being so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. I probably would if anyone had a pin to drop, but it was quiet enough that the howling wind outside intruded through the closed windows. The mention of the disgraced Sannin was enough to turn the curious lances into slight frowns and critical whispers. I stared defiantly at the dozens of judging eyes pointed in my direction. This would probably push me further away from my peers than I already was, but it didn't matter. I'm conflicted about Hashirama Senju's ideals and the thing known as the Will of Fire. Love and understanding are important in reaching peace, be that a happy one or simply grudging coexistence. But what happens when it gets in the way of peace, like Lord Third's refusal to kill Orochimaru? Because of Lord Third, Orochimaru was at large in the elemental nations, kidnapping and experimenting on God knows how many innocents. Looking at it in another way, what happens when hatred and vengeance overlap with the pursuit of peace, leading to even more war? I clenched my jaw at the remembrance of that night, expelling the surge of negativity as best as I could with an explosive breath. This wasn't about me right now. It was about the Will of Fire as an ideology. The silence stretched on until it was almost unbearable. Mizubayashi hummed. His jaw shifted like he was carefully considering his words before voicing them for the class to hear. Before he could, though, there was a rattling bell that announced the end of the period and the start of lunch. Whatever he was going to say would have been, and was, drowned by the collective scuttles and rattles of everyone packing up. I took a few curious glances at Mizubayashi as I followed the queue down the stairs. His eyes were cautious, almost. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that they were intense. His stare dug into my back when I turned to leave through the door. Maybe it was my questioning or something else entirely, but I had a feeling he'd be taking notice of me a lot more from now on. beyond being a twat of an essay marker anyway. As usual, I took to the rooftop for lunch, back against the locked doors of some kind of storeroom. Distant cries and giggles drifted from the playground below. A strange heaviness rooted me to the ground as I took frequent bites out of my sandwich. I made sure to pack some extra protein in advance. 2 hard-boiled eggs, coupled with the sandwich, I'd have more than enough energy for this afternoon's spars. Some ramen after school would be perfect for some carbs. The taste is just a bonus. I shivered a little and zipped up my coat. As cold as the weather is up here, I prefer it over the inevitable awkwardness that would come from playing with children in a sandpit. My lips turned down in disgust. Almost 2 decades later, I can still feel the grind of sand grains in the back of my mouth. I took a swig from my water bottle and leaned back against the metal doors, the chilling wind's sharp prickles dancing across my face. I stretched my tongue along the inside of my mouth, left eye twitching at the sting where I'd chewed up my cheek. Blaming eyes latched onto Sasuke. He stared back, seemingly unreadable at first glance. But I'd grown used to his usual demeanor. Iruka was to thank for that. He's consistently been pairing me with those best at taijutsu in our class, namely Sasuke, Choji, Hinata, Kiba, and a repeater from last year by the name of Sabo. With Sasuke, the tells weren't in his face, but his body. Like his shaking lead hand and the defined clench in his jaw. He was tired, plain and simple. As good of a poker face as he has, Sasuke isn't as unflappable as he's trying to have me believe in me. I had the energy to spare and then some. Darting in, I faked a jab to his head, pulling in my fist to slam an elbow into the side of his guard. His torso dipped and his weight shifted to his back leg when I took the opportunity to shoulder check him. It wasn't as effective as I thought. It didn't push him out of the circle. I did succeed in smothering him, slipping in quick body blows while he fought to push me away from his chest. A hot flash exploded across my face. The clunk of my jaws slamming together shuddered up my head and my nose began to throb. My lead hand rose between us, half open to parry and defend me, while I blinked tears away. Worst case, I'd be prepared to grab a fistful of his shirt and throw the niceties out the window. I doubted it would keep him away for long, but it'd buy me some time. Something slightly warmer than my saliva seeped across my mouth. By its heavy, metallic aftertaste, I must have chewed up that cut pretty badly. None of the academy medics would tend to it on grounds of it being self-administered, which was a bullshit rule they applied to me and me only. I know that if Sasuke were to go to them with a busted-up mouth, they'd heal it immediately, gushing about how he must have got it during sparring. It's one thing for me to shrug off the villagers, unable to do anything, but people actively sabotaging my future, not just Fujino, was starting to get old, and quickly at that. I spat a glob of bloody saliva to the side, chuckling as a girl from the Sasuke fangirl crowd belted a loud ew. The amusement was enough to force the wave of vitriol to recede and I sighed. Sasuke wasn't to blame for any of this. Hell, he's had it worse than me. Not that this was a competition or anything, but I pitied him, truly. I, at least, had almost 2 decades of experience and coping to fall back on when my parents died. It wasn't all effective, but he had none of it. Pity has no place in a fight, though. I tightened my fist and spat out another glob. As long as I didn't mangle the cut, the bleeding should stop. Sasuke glanced down at the bloody spit with a smidge of pride in his dark eyes. He batted aside my lead hand, throwing his right towards my exposed face. I pulled up my backhand to stop it. He hissed as I sunk my lead hand in from below. His tense stomach coiled around my knuckles and I leaned away from a swinging hook, mindful of the ring's edge a handful of steps behind me. One good hit would send me over. The brief pause in the fight had allowed him to reclaim the center of the ring. Now I was the one on the back foot. I threw up a hasty turtle shell born out of a year of constant pummelings from my previous life. It wouldn't save me for long. Experienced boxers had taught me as much. Boxers, who, bear in mind, aren't allowed to use anything but their fists. Sasuke's fists hit me where my hunchback turtle shell guard didn't cover, my stomach. I dug my heels deeper into the hard ground beneath us. I peered at him through my raised fists, counting through gritted teeth. Leave a man to do nothing but wail on you and they'll fall into a pattern. That was the first thing I learned. Most experienced fighters correct that, but there aren't any experienced fighters in the academy. Sasuke's hand slipped behind my neck and his elbows squeezed around my raised arms. Knee after knee collided against my forearms. Eventually, one would slip between them and end the fight. With how hard he was hitting me, I'd be surprised if I'm not gasping for air. His grunts, the scratches of our shoes against the ground, and my breaths and whispers were the only sounds I registered. I clenched my stomach, waiting it out as my body jolted. Another knee was headed my way for sure. I twisted my hips and pushed my shin against his inner thighs. I muttered a curse as our knees clacked together hollowly. Sasuke stumbled back, more off balance than he had been this entire fight. I dove for his legs, pulling them out from beneath him, and pounced. He pulled his head up and offered his back to the ground. I brought down my fist with about as much restraint as could be given his age, but enough to end the fight. A pained yelp tore his grimacing mouth wide open and I mounted his body. My twitching fist hovered over his face and it would be faster than anything he could do. This fight was over, and he could see it too. He gulped, grudging respect mingling with frustration. When Sasuke and I spar, it's not like he doesn't win. I just win more. At the same time, those aren't wins I can take any satisfaction in. Where taijutsu is concerned, my spot at the top of the class isn't assured for very long. I'd like to say it frustrates me, but that would be a lie. The academy's basic style, which is a simplified version of Hashirama Senju's taijutsu style taught to every academy student, was so widespread that nothing I did should be a surprise to anyone worth their salt. My style was a mash of the academy's taijutsu style and other ones I dabbled in throughout my short life. Mainly boxing, Muay Thai, and some grappling off the street. It was not going to last long without any improvement. Most fights I had with the top taijutsu contenders in my class were mental battles I won through experience, not superior skill. I would soon be ousted from the number 1 spot, if not this year then the next. People like Sasuke, Hinata, and Kiba had their clan's taijutsu styles and expert instruction. Those styles are more polished than my year-long experience boxing and the few tips I grabbed from conferences and friends practicing other arts. I could reach out to Lord Third, but I wouldn't. Does that mean my stumbling around blindly was my own fault? Probably. No, definitely. But we had grown too far apart for me to have that kind of relationship with him. Or maybe that was just my ego talking. I gave a mental shrug and opened my fist. Sasuke clasped his first 2 fingers around mine and I pulled him up using my free hand. The watching crowd exploded into cheers for all of 5 seconds before Iruka shut them up with a yell. He cleared his throat and smiled at the both of us. Well, more at Sasuke than me, but he still gave me my flowers. Practically glowing praise from him. That was a good fight, you two. I could see that you were both thinking multiple steps ahead. Sasuke, Naruto was just thinking a little further ahead than you were, which is why you lost. It really could have gone either way. Sasuke folded his arms with a frown and I knew better than to give him any commiserations. Having the person who beat you compliment your performance after a fight that you lost rarely feels good. I nodded at him. He blinked at me and returned it slowly. The unwanted and unneeded crowd of fangirls quickly formed around him, a few stopping to shoot nasty glares at me. I backed off with a snort and wandered over to Choji and Shikamaru, who were with the rest of the class. Sasuke and I were one of the last people to spar, so there wasn't long left till the end of the lesson and all the other interesting fights had ended before ours. I trudged down the academy's front steps sore than I would have liked. Usually, I try to fight passively, but it wasn't an option this time around. I veered around crowds of parents and children and took to the path leading into the heart of the village. The sizzles of street stalls and energized yells surged and fell. With it being winter, the sun was nearly submerged beneath the horizon at the end of the school day. I muffled a yawn behind my hands as I reached Ichiraku Ramen, taking a good look between the fabric covers on the shop's front. It was enough to see that it was busy this evening. There were 6 seated, with at least half a dozen more lined up. Dozens more would come before closing time. Nighttime is when ramen bars are the busiest in Konoha, especially during the winter. A hot bowl of ramen is the perfect thing for Konoha's freezing nights. I hung my coat on the back of the door and yelled a greeting towards the kitchen. I'm back. Ayane popped her head out of the kitchen door and grinned. You're not looking so hot today. Who beat you up? You should see the other guy. I laughed and then winced when the side of my tongue lapped against the inside of my cheek. Is your mouth cut? Yup. She frowned and pulled me into the kitchen by the hand, forced to sit on a stool while Ayame mixed some salt and warm water. I peered around the kitchen for Mr. Tucci. His usual booming laugh came from the serving window. Hey, Mr. Tucci, I called. I'm back. His response was instantaneous. I heard his footsteps before I saw him turn the corner where my legs dangled off a stool. How was school today? Pretty good. Some interesting stuff happened too. He worked on preparing a bowl of tonkatsu ramen while we talked, looking back at me when he could. Interesting how? Well, today we sparred, and that's always fun. I learned a few things during it too. The next time I spar again, I'll do it differently. Like keeping my jaw clenched and breathing out of my nose. I usually do, but I'm going to make it a habit this time. The one time I didn't, Sasuke clocked me right in the mouth. That's good, that's good. Anything else you'd like to share? He can do that after this. Ayame pressed a half-filled cup of salt water into my hands. Move it around your mouth, make sure you focus on the cut. It won't be fun, but it'll hurt less once you're done. I took a swig, a sharp spike exploding across the tender flesh. I did as instructed. Each rinse hurt less and less until the cut was a faint throb in the side of my mouth. Emptying the rest of the water into the sink, I pointed at my cheek. I've got a cut. I see, said Tucci. I'll make sure your ramen isn't too spicy, then. Now, mind answering my question? Oh, I guess you could call this interesting. I stopped at a snicker. Ayame waved her sieve at me. Broth dripped onto the kitchen floor and the scum within the tool almost tipped over its sides. When someone says anything like that, it's guaranteed to not be interesting. Now, Ayame. Tucci slid a ramen bowl through the serving window. Any more and you'll be bullying him. Don't think I haven't seen what you say to him when you think I can't hear you. She spun around with a stamp of her foot. What do you mean I'm bullying him? She said incredulously. He said far worse and you know it. As his elder by 10 years, it's my job to make sure he doesn't get a big head. My lips twitched into a smile. It's not me who has a big head right now. What was that? I glanced off at the customers slurping down the noodles with a grin. At least I can reach a shelf, short stack. I laughed when Tucci threatened to make her cut onions all night if she took it further. Anyway, we covered the will of fire today in class. If the whole idea behind it is to love and protect those around us to achieve peace, why is it only limited to the land of fire? Tucci hummed but didn't say anything for a little while. The clamor of the restaurant meant that the silence wasn't awkward, but I was left on the edge of my seat, literally, for his reply. I've never been a shinobi, so don't take my word as law. The existence of chakra and jutsu means that conflict will always be a thing. The hidden village system was invented with the end of war and conflict in mind, but the reality is that nothing has changed since the Warring Clans era. His voice trailed and I found my thoughts doing the same. Bottom line is, the will of fire is an ideal. The reality is that war will always happen, be it because of revenge, altruism, ambition, or hope. So long as those in suffering existed, there would be those who sought to change their circumstances through it. In a way, I understood why Nagato and Conan were so bent on teaching others through pain, the persona and the sensation. It's a fresh, constant reminder of the consequences of war. Just as a child learns to not touch a boiling kettle, people will learn not to wage war through mass, indiscriminate pain. But pain fades away until it's nothing but a memory. What then? Make them feel more pain? That would only fuel the cycle of hatred and retaliation. Even as my eyes grew heavy and tired, my mind grasped for alternatives and solutions. I'd come from a world less brutal than this one, where world wars had still happened. Was peace possible here, when every man, woman, and child could kill with a wave of their hand and go about their day? Naruto. My droopy eyes snapped open. Tucci mussed up my hair with a laugh. You think too much. There's no use in cooking up hypothetical futures in your head when you can't do anything about them in the present. Focus on graduating from the academy before you tackle this life's big questions. Now, if you wish to cook here, how about I teach you about proper plating? More than happy to do so, I peered attentively from my stool. Unfortunately, height isn't something I'll be seeing much of for quite some time. I worked well into the evening, only leaving when the waves of customers finally began to thin, and at Mr. Tucci's insistence too. I would have stayed longer if not for him. Would I have been able to? Probably not given that I'm moments away from nodding off, but it's the thought that counts. Finally arriving home, I only stopped to take off my shoes. Despite my exhaustion, my mind jumped to tomorrow's plans, putting an unneeded damper on my otherwise good mood. It had been a week since Fujino screwed me over and despite my doubts, I'd be willing to give her an out if she took it. Making a spectacle out of this would only make things harder for me but I was more than willing to bring her up to Lord Third if she didn't. It all depended on how tomorrow went. Chapter 1.55. Published by web novel. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There's little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternal update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer, barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. Yawns of various lengths fogged the air around me. The atmosphere was heavy with broken sleep and disgruntled mutters. The same as yesterday and the day before that, Aruka had gathered us on the track for our morning run before homeroom. The sun peeking through the cloud cover did little to ward off the chill in the air. Warm tears pooled in my eyes as a small yawn stretched my mouth open. I stretched my legs and flexed slightly numb toes from within my shoes. Choji and Shikamaru yawned one after another. Man, Shikamaru sighed. I'd rather be in bed right now. Choji's shoulders rounded, and his head slumped forward in defeat. I hate running. I shook my head. What? Shikamaru asked. You know, for someone so smart, you tend to be pretty short-sighted. His eyes narrowed. I mean, think about it. Your dad's the Jonin commander and the head of the Nar clan. The chances of you being allowed to kick back and live an easy life are next to none. Doesn't mean I have to go looking for trouble like you do, he replied. And you can't tell me that topping almost every class isn't looking for trouble. I'll do just enough to pass. In the end, I guess I'll be teamed up with Ino and Choji, which is fine by me. No reason to try so hard. Isn't there? Choji fidgeted nervously between us. I stared at Shikamaru. A part of me was annoyed by his laziness. The other wanted to laugh at the discomfort written over Choji's face. In the end, I ignored both. The world's anything but peaceful. What happens when, one day, you find yourself against someone you can't beat and wish you had given just a little more effort in your training? Or worse, when you can't save the people you care about. Choji shrunk back. Shikamaru's frown deepened. He walked towards me, mouth opening to reply when we were covered in a shroud of darkness. Aruka leered down at us. What are you three doing? Run. Choji bolted and left Shikamaru and I behind. We stared at his back before jogging after him, running side by side until we reached the cluster of stragglers. I readied myself to overtake when Shikamaru tugged the back of my shirt. What? Listen, he breathed out of his nose. We're going to continue that talk later. What happened to not looking for trouble? He scoffed. His dedication to laziness, at least, was something I could admire. I took off, moving to the front of the pack by the end of the first lap. I could have done it faster, but it would mean being a lot more sweaty by the end. I kept up my lead, glancing over my shoulder at Kiba and Sasuke. The gap between us and the class had closed a little over the month or so we'd been doing laps before school. By the time we finished, everyone was a lot more energized. They mostly complained on the way in, but the run had succeeded in waking them up. Aruka took a moment to let everyone relax before starting homeroom. Now that we're all warmed up, here are the day's announcements. With the winter break in 2 weeks, the academy will be running an open day during the holiday for interested parents and children. We're taking volunteers from across the school. Please raise your hand if you want to volunteer so I can jot down names and hand them to the coordinator. Otherwise, feel free to come to me until the end of term. Sakura was the first to volunteer, followed by Ino, who turned and stared pointedly at Shikamaru and Choji. The pair stiffened before Choji tentatively raised his hand. Shikamaru slumped forward with an audible sigh. A few more hands popped up from around the classroom, mostly friend groups who wanted something to do during the break. Shikamaru, Choji whined. The lazy boy groaned. Come on, you can't leave me alone with Ino. His pleading eyes turned to me. Naruto? I snorted. No. You don't even know what I was gonna ask. It's to help out at the open day, right? He nodded in reply. I can't. I work at Ichiraku's, and winter's their busiest. So? Choji and I stared at Shikamaru. He sat back with a smirk. I stared at him quizzically as he raised his hand. Aruka looked up from his notepad, where he was scribbling down the names of the volunteers. His eyebrows twitched upwards. Shikamaru, is that you volunteering or do you have something to say? Both, sensei. I've had an idea. Naruto works at Ichiraku's and was thinking of chipping in to cater if his boss lets him. I think more people would be willing to attend during winter if we provide them with ramen for the cold. Naruto, is this true? Excited whispers buzzed about the room. My heart rate spiked a little as Aruka blinked at me in surprise. I don't know what happened. Maybe it was the fact that I didn't want to disappoint the first expectations anyone had ever had of me, but I found myself nodding dumbly. That's quite nice of you, Aruka spoke slowly, almost like he was convincing himself rather than me. Well done. I'll take this up with Mr. Tucci when I'm next at Ichiraku's. Anyone else? With the attention off me, my eyes snapped to Shikamaru. That was dirty, you brat. Brat? He laughed. We're the same age. Are we? I can tell over your pettiness to get back at me for earlier. Despite mostly saying it in jest, my heart slowed at his comment. No matter how smart he was compared to his peers, Shikamaru was 7, while I wasn't. That said, the years of isolation had worn me away. There was just something nice about having people to talk to as an equal, especially after years of being avoided. I loved Tucci and Ayame to bits, but the situation was just different. I pushed away the swell of emotion at the thought. Choji leaned over the desk, face dimpling as he glanced worriedly between us. Guys, don't fight. We can go together. That's not so bad. And thanks in advance for the ramen. I'll take having to follow Ino around if it means I get ramen out of it. With the tension diffused, he leaned back with a smile. I blinked in surprise before laughing. No worries, big guy. Aruka waved us all goodbye as he left the classroom. Minutes later, Mizubayashi entered, a thick textbook in tow. This class wasn't as interesting as the last, with him returning to bog-standard shinobi history. Given that I'd covered the material in my own time, there was nothing my active mind could grab hold of besides flicking through the textbook for more interesting trivia. So I drowned out Mizubayashi's voice and tucked my head into the crook of my arm. When I looked up, Choji's round face filled my vision. He craned his neck up from the row ahead and I leaned back to stretch the cricks out of my neck. Hey, Naruto? Choji asked. I yawned. Yeah? Want to sit with us for lunch? Us? Who's us? He pointed to himself. Me and. Shikamaru poked my shoulder from the seat to my left. I flinched, wrestling control over my breathing before asking, why'd you do that? He shrugged and walked down the stairs. Choji fidgeted from the other side of the table. So, are you coming? I slung my jacket over my shoulders and followed Shikamaru. Sure, you're good company. He smiled. Not sure about old lazybones, though. Shikamaru stopped near the blackboard and leveled an unimpressed stare at me. I don't know if he likes the nickname, said Choji. Too bad for lazybones. I don't plan on stopping. I poked my head into the classroom. Do you guys want to head to lunch or not? I've got my food with me, but I hear the line is killer. I can't be bothered with this, Shikamaru complained. Annoying blondes. Despite his words, there wasn't any heat in his voice. Choji ran after him, and I followed. We traveled down to the dining hall, where masses of students were waiting to be served. I found our year's section and took a seat at the end of our class table. A blue tray clattered into my vision, sliding halfway across the table. I looked up, expecting Choji, only to find myself staring into a pale face and a pair of turquoise eyes. I finished my sandwich first, washing it down with some water. Ino, I nodded. What can I do for you? She surprised me by sitting back with a smile instead of replying. The silence played out between us, her smile only widening. What's so funny? I asked. Oh, nothing, she said. I expected you to be a lot more like Sasuke, is all. My brain struggled to comprehend her words for a good few moments. I think she realized because her smile widened into a grin. What gave you that impression? I asked, genuinely curious. I don't ignore people, do I? No, but you like to keep to yourself. She tilted her head. You haven't gone out of your way to hang out with anyone from class until today, and with Shikamaru of all people. I felt myself growing strangely defensive. What's wrong with Shikamaru? Ino snorted. I've known him since I could walk. He's not the easiest of people to get along with, but my parents want us to become the new Ino Shika Cho trio when we graduate. So? She clapped her hands. So, I'm curious, Naruto Uzumaki. What about a lazy, rude, annoying guy like Shikamaru has made you want to start being, what did Dad call it? Social. A breath I didn't know I was holding left my body. All of that tension and analysis only to build to such a simple question. I laughed a little. It was moments like these that made me realize just how young my classmates are. There would be brief moments of sudden maturity, and then they'd go and do something to remind me that they're still only children. Oi. 2 blue trays slid across either side of Ino. Shikamaru slumped onto the low stool, barely acknowledging her presence while Choji snuck into the one beside her as if that would do anything to help him. What are you doing here? Shikamaru asked. Ino crossed her arms and jutted out her chin. You don't control me. He flared his nostrils inside. This is why we don't get along, she frowned. You just want to exist, right, Choji? She turned so fast her hair whipped around. Choji shrunk back, looking down at his plate of fried rice. Man, Ino growled and clenched her fists close to her face. One's lazy, and the other doesn't want to say a word. I don't know why our parents keep putting us together. I watched all this unfold with a small smile that vanished once Ino's eyes found their way to me. Their intensity didn't diminish in the slightest and only grew the longer she stared. I'm looking forward to the ramen, she finally said and stood up. But what you see in these two, I don't know. As suddenly as she had arrived, Hurricane Ino was gone, leaving Choji and Shikamaru in no mood for conversation. I chuckled at their discomfort and got started on the second half of the sandwich, my eyes counting down the minutes until Fujino's class would arrive and, with it, the only thing stopping me from enjoying my evening. After the fiasco that was my last lesson with Fujino, my trust in anything she'd ever taught me went right out of the window. Thankfully, after seeing my recent test, Mr. Tucci asked Ayame to help me out, meaning I didn't have anything to worry about on the learning front. That said, I couldn't calm down. Hours spent contemplating the best angle of attack, and I wouldn't be able to do it because I just couldn't calm down. Throughout the majority of the lesson, my nerves had gotten the better of me. I didn't fear Fujino, but what I wanted to do relied solely on her buying that I knew nothing about her actions, which was true, but didn't help my nerves in the slightest. Whenever she called out my name, my pencil would slip between my clammy fingers. It was even worse now that we would be in the classroom alone. Once the lesson finished, I had to lounge about in the school library for an hour, and now, I was standing awkwardly in front of the door, eyes darting about in case anyone was around. I clenched the worn test paper in my hands, its edges worn and crinkled. The faded green door slid open, revealing Fujino, and from the looks of it, she was ready to head home. I don't know how I never noticed it before, but now I did, a brief flash of genuine fear behind her red-rimmed lenses. An easy smile washed over her face. Naruto, what can I do for you? I'm surprised you haven't headed home. It's quite late. It didn't take much faking to act the part of a nervous schoolboy on my end. Can I talk to you, sensei? She blinked and opened the classroom door for me, of course. I watched as she buzzed about, laying her bag on the table, pulling a chair and placing it opposite the teacher's desk, and even breaking out Ruka's tin of biscuits, pulling out one for each of us. Here. I took a bite out of it and chewed slowly enough to give me time to think. It wasn't enough. Fujino clasped her hands together and leaned forward. Her eyes flickered to the test paper on the table. So, what's bothering you? I slid it towards her, holding back a smile when the hand closest to it twitched. I don't want to upset you, but you marked my paper wrong. Wrong? She asked. What do you mean? I checked my paper against Taro's and Yumi's and Goto's too. It was 45%, which means, I paused. With every passing second, my heart felt like it was going to explode. I didn't pass. My head was now hung low, leaving me unable to see her reaction. No, she said, speaking low and gently. No, Naruto, you didn't fail, you did goo. I sprung up, making her jump. I know why you did it though. I grinned, both because I made her flinch but also at how quickly the blood drained from her face. She swallowed thickly, and Naruto, it's because you like me, isn't it? What? Don't you like me? I tilted my head. Actually, I think I'm your favorite student too. You wouldn't bring my grade up without me being your favorite. Her face fell, eyes blinking owlishly at me. My smile turned small and gentle. It's okay, sensei, I understand. Sometimes, we do wrong things because we don't want to hurt the people we care about. And Naruto, her face was still pale, pure shock written over every fold and wrinkle. But it's not fair to give me better marks because you like me, I said. You've got to treat me the same as everyone else, otherwise you could get in trouble. I don't want you to lose your job. That was a big enough lie that I had to try not to laugh. I might have pushed this further than I'd ever thought of, but at some point, I got too into it to stop. The words I spoke hit her with a weight I didn't know words could have. Like I was slamming her with a cudgel when I opened my mouth. Did she finally grow enough of a conscience to realize that sabotaging the education of a 6-year-old was an all-round shit thing to do? I couldn't give a single fuck either way. Pushing the paper closer to her, I gave her a respectful bow. In any other circumstance, I would rather sit through detention until the end of my school days, but the strained noise coming out of her mouth was hilarious enough for me not to care. I stepped into the corridor, expecting her to follow me. Then again, she was too stunned to speak, let alone move. Have a nice evening. The door slid shut behind me and didn't open the entire time I crossed the corridor to reach the stairs. Something told me that Fujino didn't see this turn of events coming. In all honesty, it wasn't the first thing on my mind, but once the rage and incomprehension died down, I realized two things. The first was that while Lord Third would instantly resolve the situation, part of me wanted to see if I was up to the challenge of doing it on my own. Fujino wouldn't be the last person to try and pull something over me in my career. It would be better for me to try and resolve it in a safe environment where I could always fall back on Lord Third if it got out of hand. The second wasn't nearly as grand or well thought out. There was just a personal pleasure in throwing a wrench in her plot on my own terms. The shock on her face made me snigger while I walked home. The best thing about it was that there would be nothing to punish me for. As great as it felt to make her squirm, however, I wasn't under any illusion that this would stop her, but what I did do was warn her. After this, there was no way she didn't know that I was onto her. If Fujino had any shred of decency left, she would stop here, but in case she didn't, well, Lord Third would be around to deliver my stipend in a few weeks. I vented most of my frustration, and she'd had her warning. Whatever happened next would be out of my hands and in that of the Hokages. Chapter 1.6.6. Published by Web Novel. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternal update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer, barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. When I opened my eyes, the world was on fire. Everything, from the sky to the earth, was alight with burning orange tendrils that licked angrily at me. Blackened, towering buildings smoldered and the heavy scent of charred flesh violated my nose. I retched and fell to my knees, palms burning. When I rose, a scorched path opened itself from within the sea of flames. I walked to it, every step spawning a fresh wave of nausea, but I was eager to escape the oppressive heat. I passed by buildings, leveled or destroyed. Familiar buildings. I swallowed thickly and continued. My ribs curled inwards, stomach clenched. The air turned cold, but when I looked back, the fires stretched as far as the horizon could see, soundless. A cry snatched the silence. In the clearing ahead of me, through the broken walls of the village, I gazed upon the stuff of my nightmares. My lips parted. A strange, strangling gasp left my mouth. This nightmare, this same nightmare, it wasn't one I'd had in years. Cold, foreign shock easily gave way to furious anger. I marched through the broken walls and shook my fist skyward. You fucking bastard, do you enjoy torturing me like this, huh? Why do you do this? What did I ever do to you? Halfway through my tirade, the world shimmered. I blinked, and it slipped down my face. As usual, I made sure to keep my back to the baby on the altar. I deafened my ears to the final words. They pulsed in my head instead. Blood-red eyes blinked down at me. Those were not the mindless eyes of a beast. There was no Tomo in them. Its lips curved up, mocking me, even as its fur lost its substance and its body evaporated and swirled in a crimson haze of chakra. The world disintegrated, except for the altar I'd so far made it a point to ignore. Too lay at its base, lightless eyes pointed at me. Within the surrounding abyss, I looked for it, knowing where it would be as sure as I was that the sun would rise once I woke up. There he was. His single remaining eye was nothing more than a dot in the distance, but he was there, pulling strings in the background and forcing the world to dance to his tune. I sent a kunai hurtling at him with a flick of my wrist. Then, I looked down at myself, toothless, swaddled in the very same orange blanket I'd fashioned into a scarf last week. Laughing softly, I closed my eyes and, after a time that could have been seconds or far longer, I awoke. I didn't sit up immediately but stared at the roof. The world rocked uneasily beneath me, vision fading in and out of focus. I swallowed and winced at my parched throat. The sun was just beginning to rise and I was awake even earlier than the birds. My heart thrummed uneasily inside my chest. Clearly, I wouldn't be going back to sleep until the day was over. Minutes later I took to the streets on a morning run that would kick off my day. It was the first thing I did after freshening up, and for good reason too. Despite the thin veneer of productivity, the 2-week-long break from the academy was not going very well for me and the adherence to a schedule was about the only thing stopping me from sleeping in all day. Throughout my life, both here and elsewhere, I've always been someone whose thoughts are prone to spinning wildly out of control. It wasn't too big of a deal before. The biggest problems I'd ever faced were looming exams or narrowly missing my rent. But now, I had to look forward to a life of constant battle and what would probably be my death in around a decade. It, quite frankly, pisses me off to admit but the thought terrified me. My hatred for Obito and his hand in the sequence of events leading to my death was nothing compared to how scared I was of my future. It was part of the reason why I never hung out with any of my peers and holed myself up in the library or on the school's roof until now. Life itself felt too slow for me. I couldn't progress fast enough. Chakra and all it entailed was barred to me until the new year at the earliest. Meanwhile, Madara, or his will through Obito, was off manipulating things in his favor while I had to deal with children, bitter adults, and my powerlessness. The powerlessness to change any of the things that inspired that fear in the first place. That's how things were up until last year, anyway. After I met Tucci and Ayame, the sense of spiraling hopelessness screeched to a halt. I could, for once, live in the moment. But my spells of negativity, while made worse by the unjust hatred aimed at me, would have happened anyway. I mean, who on God's green earth would be able to live with the knowledge of a future where they're likely to die? I tutted once and focused on putting one foot in front of the other, swallowing the taste of blood. My heart wasn't in it today. I was certain it would not be in much of anything. I never understood that nightmare. Was it something my mind had concocted years after the fact? Was it the Nine Tails doing it to screw with me out of boredom? I just didn't know. When I had finished my run around the village, I returned no calmer than I was when I left. Restlessness, individual chilling pinpricks, danced across my skin from crown to feet, and my breakfast was tasteless on my tongue. Glancing about the village on my way to Ichiraku ramen only worsened it. All my thoughts were as far removed as could be from ramen. I looked at the children darting about, waved off by grinning parents, and seethed with indignation. How could they smile like that with everything I knew was coming? I smiled wryly to myself at the thought, realizing that I was the only one who knew what was coming. It was almost ironic, really. I took a small detour, following the pair of siblings as they raced towards Konoha's main playground, located in the center of the village. Not out of any desire to go and play, but to just watch. Maybe seeing their careless innocence would banish the spell of stormy thoughts that I could do absolutely fuck all about. And it did for a while, until I heard the crying. If you're a Hyuga, then show us your Byakugan. Her eyes stung. She clasped her hands close, eyes darting about. She gulped once and her lips trembled. Her father's voice boomed in her head. You are the heir to the main clan, Hinata. It's high time that you carry yourself as such. Kindness will get you nowhere in this world. But fainter, barely a whisper, her mother's words came to mind. There's enough bloodshed and cruelty in this world, Hinata. Be that smidge of missing kindness, make friends, talk things out, and maybe things will become better. Hinata remembered the hope she felt that day. Looking into the eyes of her assembled classmates, she saw none of what her mother had spoken of. Her stomach clenched, edging closer to her ribcage. But if you're not, don't look at us. Nobu stomped to the front of the pack with a mocking grin. Your eyes are real freaky, huh, Byakugan monster. Hinata gasped, but it came out as a whimper. Nobu blinked and then snickered. She squeezed her eyes shut, heat exploding across their lids. Her heart hammered in her chest. Never in her life had she expected to hear her clan's prized ability be insulted, and insulted because of her. She wished she were anywhere but here, in the middle of the playground, surrounded by their loud, cruel laughter. Her father's lessons were at the forefront of her mind, always there, so cold and stern. But Hinata could not adhere to them. No, she never could. Never enough. Always falling short of his expectations, their expectations. Her throat trembled with the weight of her fear, 1,000 unspoken words strangled. She opened her eyes to a blurred world, surrounded by her classmates, people she thought she could become friends with. It was why all of this had begun. Foolishly, she had hoped that maybe she could have fun here. Hinata might have not been very social during the first term, but this was her chance. The invitation to come and play at least allowed some escape from her father's demanding gaze. Unfortunately, it proved to be the same, maybe worse, because no one there, save for Neji, had spoken to her like this before. The circle inched closer, looming over her. Hinata's head swiveled around. Everywhere she looked, she saw unbridled glee at her suffering. In one step, Nobu was in front of her, breaching the gap between her and them. His hot breath washed over her face and she stumbled. She looked up, paralyzed. His form blotted out the sky, casting an intimidating darkness over everything. Looky here, everyone, the Byakugan monster is crying. Hinata closed her eyes. No one would come to help her and she could not help herself. Their laughter washed over her. Her eyes burned. A fresh wave of hot tears seeped out, trailing burning paths down the sides of her face. Her father was right. She would never be enough. Not for him, not for them, or herself. Enough. The laughter stopped. You Uzumaki? Nobu stepped away from her, all amusement vanishing from his face. What are you doing here? Her eyes snapped open out of pure shock. Uzumaki was notorious for vanishing during break times. No one knew where he went during school, let alone outside of it. A small warmth ignited in her chest. Someone had come to help her. Naruto glanced around the circle, and then at Nobu. Get lost, all of you. Nobu frowned. Wait, why do we have to listen to Yo? Do you really want to finish that sentence? Naruto asked, boredom bleeding into his voice. He shared a glance with someone in the circle of people surrounding them and turned heel. Let's go, everyone. It's the holiday, we don't need to waste our time with them. As the crowd dispersed, Hinata rose to her feet, patting herself down. A wet chill spread across the small of her back and she looked down at the puddle behind her. Ignoring the discomfort, Hinata bowed to Naruto. Thank you for helping me. Naruto remained silent and walked away. Stumbling a little, Hinata followed him, torn between speaking and simply continuing in silence. I'll walk you home so you can get yourself cleaned up. Thank you. She looked down, shrinking into herself. While Hinata was grateful, she was also frustrated that she had to be saved in the first place. Soon, she could see the compound in the distance, and their walk slowed to a stop. Naruto looked her up and down before he asked, what was that? Back in the park, I mean. Excuse me? Why did you let them do that to you? You let them get close, even when it was clear as day Nobu wasn't looking to have a conversation. In fact, why do you let them bully you at all? Hinata stammered, not expecting the barrage of questions. Naruto frowned. I've seen you in sparring. You could have dealt with Nobu easily. Did you expect someone would come to help you? She stepped back. Naruto stepped forward. Or did you give up? His voice dropped a tone. Because if you did, I don't see any reason why you're trying to be a shinobi. Weakness is something that no one can be blamed for. So long as you try to overcome it, no one has any right to make fun of you for it. But you willingly let them do this to you, even when both of us know you could have fought back. He was not yelling, but his voice was intense. Hinata's heart forced itself up her throat. Each of his accusations worked ceaselessly to destroy the veil of safety his help had faintly brought. Was he here to make fun of her as well? Was nowhere safe? This world isn't kind, Hinata, and it's not fair either. People aren't kind. No matter what Lord Third says about the village being a family, that will always be true. Naruto sighed once before his voice regained its steel. I won't mince my words. Grow a damn spine. You have everything going for you. You have your clan's vast wealth, skilled shinobi to ask questions to, and if all else fails, the reputation to keep people like Nobu away. Somehow, Hinata had found her voice again. She swallowed her heart back down and yelled, then why? Both she and Naruto were stunned into silence at how loud it was. Hinata froze, afraid. A measure of gentleness entered his tired blue eyes. I've told you already. You allow them to. You're competent, but you're not strong. Become strong where it matters. Carry yourself in a way that you can be proud of and people like Nobu will never bother you again. Hinata chewed on her lip as Naruto walked away. She peered at a puddle in front of her while her equally helpless reflection blinked back. Lady Hinata. The spell was broken, and she looked up, one of the many Hyuga guards marching towards her. His face was set into a deep scowl, but that was usual for most people in the compound. Why do you look like this? He turned his accusatory gaze to Naruto and his frown deepened. No, Hinata waved her hands in front of her. He didn't do it. I fell over and he brought me back home. I see, he said. In any case, come with me. You must freshen up. Lord Hiyashi has asked that you take your lunch with him today. Hinata gulped but fell in step with him. She looked back. Naruto stood at the start of the footpath and offered her a resolute nod. She nodded back, a foreign solidness fueling the action. She clenched her fist and took one step forwards, and then another, until the reception hall was the only thing she could see. Chapter 1.7. Published by Web Novel. The Cycle of Hatred. A Naruto S.I. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternalillusion update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer, barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. A mug of piping hot coffee nested between his numbed hands, sleeves dragged halfway over his wrist and a blanket draped around him. Haruka took slow, cautious sips from the cup, watching the sun from the balcony of his apartment. His home of 14 years, going on 15 soon. He smiled softly. It was a strange smile, pulled until it was taut. While grateful for the home and the den of happy memories it had become, its foundations lay on the worst night of his life. It took time and painstaking effort, but Haruka had made something of himself, rising to the rank of his parents, Chunin. Blowing a little over the coffee, he tipped his head back and took a gulp. It was not exactly morning anymore, but there was no such thing as the wrong time for coffee. After Haruka's promotion a few years ago, the steady grind of C-rank missions slowed down as his enthusiasm waned. Even before he was given his flak jacket, he knew that being out in the field was not something he liked. He did not enjoy acting as an assassin for hire, and though he had killed many deserving of death, he had done worse to those who did not. Because above all else, shinobi must fulfill their obligations to a paying client. A little under a week ago, his first term as a teacher at the academy had drawn to a close and he knew deep down that this was his calling. Haruka had felt more satisfaction in the brief months spent teaching than all the time spent in active service to the village. The negatives of the job were nothing in comparison. So long as he made sure to meter his time out responsibly, the divide between his private and professional lives would remain undisturbed. Haruka's musings were cut short by the crisp sound of a knock on his door. He shrugged off the blanket and rose, with some effort, out of the reclining outdoor chair and into the warm apartment and opened the door. Fujino? She looked up and he realized immediately that she wasn't okay. Her dark eyes looked exhausted, framed by dark bags, and her already pale skin held a deathly pallor. Can I come in? She sighed. Haruka opened the door wide. Yes, come in. He watched her out of the corner of his eye as he closed the door. She took a seat in his living room, shrinking into herself. Coffee? Haruka froze, waiting for her reply. When she did not respond, he asked again. What? Fujino flinched, blinking rapidly. Sorry, I didn't hear you. I asked if you wanted some coffee. Yes, please, Lord knows I need it. With his half-finished coffee in one hand and Fujino's in the other, he glanced at her out of his peripheral vision. So, do you want to tell me what brought you here so early? Haruka asked. Instead of answering, Fujino set her coffee down on the low table in front of her and faced him. Now that I think about it, Haruka, our relationship is quite the ill-fated one. Hey, he grinned, but it was more of a grimace. Yes, I suppose so. We did meet on the worst night of both our lives. An uncomfortable silence descended. Fujino's face grew haunted and Haruka almost wished he was anywhere else before shaking himself free of the errant thought. Fujino glanced at him appraising Ly. That might be true, but you've made something of yourself. You're different, nothing like the frail little boy I carried out of the rubble of his family home. He gritted his teeth. Her words alone had brought the shadows of the past into the light. He watched as the walls of his new home caved in before his eyes, the faint call of his mother's desperate voice coming from so very far away. And me, Fujino stopped inside. I'm no different to who I was on the night I lost Junpei. Seeing her the way she was, so defeated, hurt Haruka. No matter the ill-fated nature of the friendship, he liked to think that it wasn't all bad. What's wrong, Fujino? He urged her. Whether or not he wanted that train of thought to end for his sake or hers, he didn't know. She looked at him. I can't do this, Haruka. I can't. Do what? Fujino didn't reply for a moment. Him, Naruto Uzumaki. Ah. Suddenly, it made so much more sense but raised just as many questions. Why now, after months of no indication that it weighed so heavily on her? But then again, Haruka was very much the same. He made it a point to shove all his feelings and thoughts so deep into the recesses of his mind knowing that one day, it would rear its ugly head. It seemed, for Fujino, that day had come. He's nothing like I thought he'd be, she babbled. He's smart and kind, and completely impervious to all the cold stares and horrible things we all say to him and it's terrible. I understand, believe me, Fujino. I do. Why you do? Haruka nodded. I don't know what to make of him. When Lord Third told me that I would be his teacher, I didn't take it well. I mean, how could I? But being his homeroom teacher has baffled me even more. I can't look at him without seeing something of that night. The whiskers, the slightly sharper than average teeth, and those eyes that seem to look through me. But it's wrong, Haruka. Fujino almost wailed. He's just a boy. I know, Fujino, Haruka replied and the uncomfortable silence returned. The faint urge to throw up some kind of excuse to leave flashed across his mind, not that it was an excuse. But at the same time, leaving her to wallow around alone in this state would do her no favors, especially because she would return to teaching Naruto by the week's end. He cleared his throat. How about this? I've got a few errands to run for the open day at the end of the week. Stick with me for a little while and see if this helps you take your mind off things. Brows scrunched together, Fujino opened her mouth to speak. Hold on now, said Haruka. If you're going to tell me you need to go back home, don't. We both know that's the last place you need to be. If you're not up for a busy day, at least let me treat you to some ramen. She clenched her jaw and eventually sighed. All right, fine. When do we leave? Smiling, he slung on his jacket and opened the door. Right now. Not much later, they ducked their heads through the blinds of the small shop. The older man beamed at him from over the counter. Haruka, how have you been? Said Tucci. You rarely come these days. I know. He waddled through two stools and prompted Fujino to sit beside him. I haven't found the time. Tucci waved him off with a familiar knowing smile. None of that. I've heard you've become a teacher. What happened to becoming the god of shinobi? Haruka cringed a little. That, yeah, didn't work out. Fujino snorted from beside him, flushing a little when they turned to her. And who's this? Tucci asked. Fujino, my colleague and friend. Fujino, this is Mr. Tucci, ramen chef extraordinaire. Enough of that, kid. Miss, Fujino, since you're new here, your first meal is free of charge. She reached into her purse but pulled her hand back out at his glare. I'm glad we've come to an understanding. What'll you be having? Haruka waited until she rattled off a tentative of salt-flavored ramen to ask Tucci if he would pitch into the academy's open day. I heard about that. Are you sure you want us to cater? We're a much smaller restaurant and will need quite a bit of help with supplies and costs. If I use my current stock, it won't last until the end of the month. That'll be fine. You'll be provided for. All we need is agreement from you. Looks like I'll have to get the old ramen cart into shape. He glanced back. Hey, Ayame. Yeah? Without Tucci blocking the majority of the kitchen from view, Haruka got a good look at the people behind the counter. The usual sight of Ayame flashed across his mind. Through the open door at the back, he saw the shock of blonde hair sitting at a desk in the room behind the kitchen. Fujino looked at him, just as shocked, staring at the oblivious boy. Spotted Naruto, have you? Tucci smiled. He's an interesting boy. Turned up one day with a froggy wallet filled to the brim, all serious-like, and said, what'll this get me? Haruka snorted at the mental image, distinctly aware of Fujino's discomfort from beside him. Tucci noticed it too from the slight frown pinching his brow. Say, Miss Fujino, you're Naruto's language teacher, right? Her head rose sharply. What do you think of him? He's strange. He laughed. Right? I've never seen a kid like him. He's quiet and keeps to himself more often than not, but he's very thoughtful too. He might not look it, what with those eyes that always look like they're picking a fight. Haruka couldn't help the loud snort that escaped him, nor could he stop it from growing into a laugh. I'm sorry, he coughed. All this time, I've been trying to find a way to describe his eyes and you've nailed it. Tucci shook his head in amusement and the disturbance even drew Fujino's gaze away from the kitchen. What do you think of him? She asked. Who? Tucci asked as he slid the hot ramen bowl towards Fujino. Naruto. Iruka stopped eating from his bowl, prepared by Tucci without the need to ask. The question was one he also wanted an answer to. Tucci hummed. I've known Naruto for a year now so I can't claim to be an expert, but he's a kind but lonely boy. There's more to him than just those two things, but it's the best way I could answer your question. No, thank you. You've given me a lot to think about. She frowned into her bowl with intense eyes. Something told Iruka that he had not given her more to think about than she already had but returned to his bowl. He and Tucci continued to hash out the details of the open day and what Tucci could provide himself. They were done by the time they finished their bowls, which Tucci quickly topped up. Since that's done, how about I tell you more about Naruto? As his teachers, I think you benefit from hearing more about how he thinks, though don't assume everything I say is the truth. Iruka shared a glance with Fujino and they leaned forward as one. He left the bar well into the afternoon, having learned more about Naruto than ever before. It dragged at his mind while he went through the rest of the day and prepared for the open day. His feelings, on the other hand, weren't so straightforward, but the boy behind the fears and nightmares was slowly starting to form. Whether or not Fujino saw that same boy, Iruka didn't know. From what he could see of her at work the next few days, the meal at Ichiraku's had at least cleared some of the storminess from her face. The open day fell halfway through the winter break, on the first weekend in fact, and while it wasn't as big as the first day of the academic year, it was still something that a fair bit of the village was excited about. Though on second thought, it was probably because of the boom in the Leaf's birth rate after the Ninetales rampage. The village not so subtly was rewarding families for having children, meaning that the population had skyrocketed in the last 5 years. Or was it steadily returning to where it used to be? Either way, it meant that Ayame and I had our work cut out for us. Tucci had lent us what he called his ramen cart, a wheelable cooking station. Thankfully, the academy had hired a genin team on a D-rank mission to help us move the cart to the front of the academy as well as run back and forth to Ichiraku's to top up our quickly decreasing stock. It was a win-win situation in my book. They got some free ramen and money and we didn't have to break our backs wheeling the damn thing. All in all, the open day wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. There was a welcome talk from Lord Third and guided tours led by the older students. After that, parents and kids were free to wander the school in search of the many exhibits set up by the subject teachers, including the physical side of the academy. For that, they had set up an obstacle course on the track field. Over the last 2 hours, I didn't have much opportunity to leave the cart, except for when Ayame sent me to fetch some water or throw something away. She was doing all the heavy lifting where the ramen was concerned, not that I was tall enough to contribute. Throw in what seemed to be boundless amounts of energy and it was no wonder I couldn't keep my eyes off the obstacle course over yonder. Naruto, Ayame's breath dampened the air as she shook the noodles in the strainer. Be a dear and start up the song again, please. That should bring some more customers. I grinned and pressed a button on the weird megaphone-looking thing taped to the top of the cart. A catchy tune blared out of it, echoing far beyond the cart. Ayame groaned and my grin only widened. According to her, she was old enough to remember when she, her mother, and her father wandered the village's streets to that very same tune. Why hasn't Dad got rid of this thing? Hey, I hopped down to the floor and dusted my trousers. It's a nice song, don't you think? Tilda, welcome to the ramen stop. Tilda, one day, it'll be a shop, but till then, my friend, you'll have to lend me a hand. Tilda. A growl rumbled in her throat and she lobbed an onion root at my head. I saw it coming from a mile away and ducked, allowing it to tumble into the bushes behind me. Never again. If Dad hears you singing that, then he'll start. She shook her head. No thank you. I had to deal with years of that irritating jingle. I laughed some more at her irritation. She hadn't started like this at all. Hell, she was even singing along, to begin with. But I guess 2 hours of it had become pretty annoying, especially since I didn't help matters. Singing along every single time it played wasn't the nicest thing to do, but sue me, I was starting to get pretty goddamn bored. My gaze drifted to the obstacle course once again. The echoing chime of a bell reached me before it was smothered by a rising tide of cheers. Someone had probably beaten the course, which was impressive considering it was the one that my class was doing before the winter break. No one had completed it at all the entire evening. I craned my neck skyward as if it would somehow allow me to see who it was that won. Go. Huh? Ayame nodded at me with a smile. The obstacle course. Go did. I pulled my eyes away from the section of wall blocking my vision with some reluctance. Nah, it's fine. I've got to be here to help you. Don't worry about it. You're what, 7? I can't expect you to sit down for 2 hours straight and not get antsy. Go. It'll be good for you to let loose a little. I was already walking away when I voiced my doubt. Are you sure? I stopped to ask as she nodded again. Okay, I'll go to the obstacle course and come right back, Kay. Take your time, her voice echoed. Go see your friends or something. I work with Dad during rush hour. This is nothing. Guilty conscience sufficiently mollified, I took off running, turning the corner to see a child clambering down from the last log. I glanced at the blackboard held up by one of the students to his time of 1 minute 52 before I was spotted by the pair jotting down the scores of the kids. I recognized them as one of the many kids who'd been bribed to come by the promise of free ramen during the last week of school and waved them over. What's up? The girl asked, swallowing a yawn. I was wondering if I could give the obstacle course a try. She glanced furtively at her classmate, who mussed up his bright brown hair with a frown. I mean, I dunno, it's not like you can't. Would a bowl each at the end of this sweeten the deal? Their head snapped towards me. Deal. Moments later, I was carefully balanced on top of the first log with the next one about 1 arm's length away, ready to start. There were only 7 logs to clear, half less than usual, and it wouldn't be too difficult, especially since I'd been slowly introducing some parkour to my morning runs recently. But I needed something to waste some energy on, so here I was. Right, the boy called. Ready, go. After the first step, it was smooth sailing. The subsequent jumps granted me even more momentum until the biting wind was nothing in the face of my quickly burning heart. Before I knew it, it was over, and I tugged the rope dangling from the bell to signal the end of the game. I grinned in the face of the roaring applause as a gaggle of starry-eyed kids crowded around the final log. Whoa, that was so cool. Can you teach me to do that? To say that I didn't feel a small smidge of pride at their adoration would be a lie, but from the looks the 2 students in charge of this deal were sending me, there was only one real answer to their praise. I winked at them, leaning in to share the conspiratory secret. You can find out if you join the academy. Their responses were about as excitable as I'd expected. A part of me felt bad about enticing them into what would most likely be a life fraught with suffering, but at the very least, they would have the option to quit if things got too hairy and had parents look out for them. That was more than the orphans in my class had. They rushed back to their respective parents, tugging eagerly at their clothes. I stretched out my now warm limbs and hopped down, ready to return to boring monotony once more. Of course, things were never that simple. Goddamn demon brat. A wave of whispers and glances rippled through the crowd, but nobody added any fuel to the fire. I didn't flinch in the face of the scorn from the mother of the boy whose record I'd smashed to pieces. I simply bowed in her direction once before walking away. I knew how these things went, after all. One reply, good or bad, would lead to more insults and make it a spectacle. None of the kids deserved to have a happy evening ruined, no matter how much their parents deserved a tongue lashing. On my way out I caught the eyes of the 2 students, who looked absolutely nonplussed, both offering me an awkward smile that I returned. Ayame was quick to notice my frown. What happened to you and why are you back so early? Didn't you go to see your friends? Not in the mood anymore, I grunted. Now, what can I help with? One intense stare down later, she shuffled to the left to make some space for me. She pointed at some scraps pushed to the side of a cutting board. Throw these away. I heard the voices before I saw what was happening. Assuming the worst case, I sprinted back to the cart. That godforsaken boy is behind your counter? No wonder your ramen is so bitter. I'll make sure to tell everyone I know to stay away from Ichiraku's. Ayame, more furious than I'd ever seen her, poked her flushed face through the cart. Excuse me? What right do you have to do anything of the sort, you bitch? The woman shoved a finger in her face, her hair dyed an eye-searing orange and yelled something incomprehensible. Her son met my eyes from around her ankles and buried his chin in his chest. I beckoned him over and he trotted towards me, slipping under his mother's notice. Typical. Their shouting match raged on, so I bent down on a knee to talk to him. What's your name, kid? Haruto Suzumaki. Really? I feigned mock horror. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. You stole my name. It wasn't the best thing to start with given he was currently attempting to push his chin even deeper into his chest, so I changed track. What's up with your mother? He blinked wetly. I'm sorry, big bro. I told her you were cool B, but she didn't listen. I watched him swallow a sob, ruffling his brown hair to calm him down. Hey, do you know what makes a super strong shinobi? And no? You get 3 guesses. He wiped his eyes. Super strong jutsu? Nope. Being good at obstacle courses? I crossed my arms over each other. Nope. Want me to tell you? Why yes, please. It's being able to keep a calm head. If you control this, I tapped a finger to the side of my head. No one will be able to push you around. Haruto frowned and tilted his head in disbelief. Really, big bro Naruto? Yup, if you can keep a cool head, you can do lots of things. Like, figuring out the best way to train. It's not good to get upset and then accidentally hurt yourself, is it? I guess not. Right? I grinned at him, drawing out a small smile. So, what kind of shinobi do you want to be, Haruto? That question seemed to do the trick. His eyes lit up as he launched into a tirade on how the 4th Hokage was the coolest Hokage ever, which I had to admit, did bring a smile to my face. Every so often, I returned my eyes to the ongoing argument between Yame and Haruto's mum. It was growing even more ferocious, Ayame having taken a fistful of the woman's dress in her left hand and waving a ladle threateningly in her right. Thankfully, one of the teachers heard the commotion in the distance and rushed over in a blitz of movement, startling the both of them. Haruto's smile vanished at the sight of the green flak jacket. When the shinobi turned around, I frowned at the telltale scar across the bridge of his nose. What's going on? Iruka swept his stern gaze across the small crowd that had gathered over the past few minutes. He zeroed in on the main culprits, brow soaring in shock. Ayame, what's going on here? She let go of the woman's clothes and fixed her underneath her cap. This woman marched up to our cart, completely unprovoked, and called Naruto all sorts of horrible things. Ayame shot her a scathing glare that was returned with equal intensity. I'll admit that it got out of hand, but what kind of adult treats a child this way? Iruka hummed and folded his arms. And what do you have to say for yourself, Mrs. Suzumaki, the orange-haired woman said, offering a small, demure bow. That boy intentionally participated in the obstacle course, as a student, to diminish my son's achievements. But with nothing I could do, I came to buy the two of us some ramen before heading home. I see, Iruka said, his voice carefully controlled, but I don't understand what that is to explain the insults you levied against a student of this school. The woman blinked in mild confusion. Well, given his unpleasantness, it's only right to assume. Assume what, exactly? A strange edge bled into Iruka's voice. It wasn't one I had ever heard from him before. The crowd slowly dispersed until it was only me, Ayame, Haruto, and his mother. Before you say anything that you'll regret, I would have you know that the boy you are about to speak of is my student. I have witnessed what kind of person he is for several months and only come second to Ayame here in terms of understanding him. My mouth fell open against my will. The words were just so foreign coming out of his mouth. He barely had a kind word to say about me for months. Not that he had ever said an unkind word about me either, but the shift in behavior smacked me right in the face. Haruto's mother scrambled into a boy. And my apologies, esteemed shinobi. Didn't know, or intend to offend you or your. Her eyes widened when she saw her son standing right beside me. To his credit, Haruto stuck out his chin and stared right back. Attaboy, I whispered before shushing his giggle. Ayame, Iruka asked, is this something that needs to be elevated beyond an apology? I can do so if you wish, but it would save all involved the time and money if this could be settled with a formal apology. I mean, her embarrassed gaze flicked over to me for an instant. If Naruto's cool with it, then so am I. For the first time, my teacher looked at me, and I mean really looked at me, none of the half-second glances or clouded stares he'd been leveling at me all year. I looked back, unsure of what to make of the sadness in his eyes. What do you say, Naruto? Well, Haruto tugged on my coat nervously. I blinked down at him, and then at his mother. I don't see why an apology wouldn't suffice, but could I talk to Mrs. Suzumaki first? He swept a hand in her direction and shuffled out of the way. Ma'am? She flinched. Why? What do you mean? She asked as the fear subsided. Why did you do it? I didn't insult Haruto. I didn't discourage him. Heck, I even encouraged him. He's a pretty cute kid, you know. It'd be criminal for me to upset him. Haruto tittered from behind us, thawing the tension a little. His mother still looked hesitant, a whole host of complicated emotions pooling in her eyes, and I realized almost immediately that this wouldn't be an instant thing. Maybe I'd succeeded in bridging some of the gap through her son, but so long as my reputation within the village remained as the demon or the fox brat, I'd be having conversations like this all day. How about this? I whispered. You apologize and then go about the rest of the open day. Whether or not you choose to enroll Haruto next year is your choice, but don't ruin this for him. She bit her lip, some cutting retort probably on the tip of her tongue until she saw his hopeful face and innocent gray eyes. I am sorry, to the both of you. Ayame didn't look convinced, but I stopped her from saying anything with a smile. It would only draw this out further. I nodded at Iruka, noticing that the odd sadness still hadn't quite left his eyes. Mrs. Suzumaki, I think that's that. Feel free to enjoy the rest of the open day, but one more incident and I'll have to ask you to leave. She gave a hasty bow and pulled Haruto behind her, though not before he could yell, bye, big bro. Over his shoulder, Iruka left as soon as they did, but the awkwardness was still heavy in the air. Naruto, Ayame huffed, a thousand things burning in her brown eyes. Nope. She tried again but I ignored her incredulous gaze. Why? She frowned, hand on hip. That bitch, evil woman deserves so much worse than an apology. I agree. I raised my voice before she could get another word, but Haruto didn't deserve to see any of it. He's like 4, right? Something like that, anyway. Ayame chewed her lip. But what about you, then? You're a kid. You shouldn't have to sit there and take fully grown adults treating you like that. You're lucky Iruka was there this time. He's a pretty nice guy, you know. Nice guy. Iruka wasn't the first person who came to mind when I thought of a nice guy. I didn't know what happened, but the change in heart was a welcome one. That was one less teacher to worry about, and provided Fujino didn't escalate, the only person I'd have to worry about was Mizubayashi. And honestly, his class was a breeze. In no time at all, helped by the jingle playing constantly, the stream of customers had started once more. There were a lot more of them too since the open day was slowly coming to an end. Surprisingly, Haruto and his mother made a stop to buy some to go for their whole family, which hadn't mollified Ayame, but it was water under the bridge for me. The fact that Mr. Tucci promised both of us a decent split from the earnings certainly helped hasten the process. 5 minutes before closing time, the Genin team returned, ready to take the cart back. I muffled a teary yawn as light snowflakes drifted on the breeze and melted on the sleeves of my jacket. Winter would be over soon, and if we were lucky, the coming spring term would finally introduce us to the wonders of chakra. Chapter 1.88. Published by web novel. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternalillusion update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer. Barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. Hinata breathed in the cold morning air, taking in the fog-shrouded courtyard as she walked across the clan compound. These days, she walked a little straighter, made eye contact for longer, and was even trying to curb her constant stuttering. It wasn't always smooth sailing, and there were days when her doubts voiced themselves louder than usual, but she felt proud of herself. She walked across the polished wooden floorboards of the sparring room, where her father and Neji would be waiting. She had done all she could to avoid that hall after the unpleasantness of last month's sparring, but there was only so long that she could put it out of her mind. A handful of weeks whizzed by since the incident with Naruto, and while she would have liked the surge in confidence to be a permanent thing, Hinata knew she would have to start from the very bottom, which meant being able to eat in the same room as her father without shrinking back from him. It was hard, at first, and her desire to simply take her meal with Hanabi in their room didn't make things easier. But there was one good thing that had come from eating with her father. He began to try and understand her. Months of her bowing her head at his disparaging words had left an unflattering impression of him, but the meals helped. Compliments from him felt foreign, but he was beginning to look like more of a man and less of a statue. All of this and more wriggled in the back of her mind as she entered the room and laid eyes on him. Father, she bowed. His face was set in an ever-present frown, but his eyes were appraising her. Life at the Hyuga compound had shifted since the day Naruto had made his mark on her life. It wasn't noticeable at first, but it all came to a head when she spoke back to Neji, pleasing the elders who often came to watch her spars. Of course, it hadn't helped the subsequent beating from her cousin, but because of it, her father and the elders hadn't completely written her off. It was then that Hinata learned the horror of the caged bird seal. She glanced at Neji. He glared at her overfolded arms and, despite what she saw that day, her chest tightened in anger. It took a while for her to process what it was she was feeling, but she got there. Not only anger but frustration. No matter how she felt about the branch clan's situation, she would not let him beat her senseless out of pity. Hinata, her father nodded. Today, you will take these past months learning of the gentle fist's forms and spar Neji. Yes. He looked at Neji. It would do you well to remember that I will not tolerate a repeat of last month. Neji scoffed. The rules, as always, are simple. Fight until you can go no longer, or until I say so. He took a seat at the end of the hall near the entrance. Begin. Gathering her chakra, Hinata made a hand seal in front of her face just as Neji did. The world's color washed away, revealing all that lay beneath the surface. Neji took the initiative to put her arms out of commission for the fight, but she wouldn't let it happen so easily. Slapping away his lead hand, she just about deflected the other upward, forcing him to backpedal. Darting forward, a shot at his head turned into a knife hand aimed at his throat. He slipped it with a growl, driving the palm into her stomach. Hinata took it with a wince, trapping his arm in the crook of her elbow. She drove a closed fist into his stomach, maneuvering a little around the locked limb. He thrashed in an attempt to escape her grip, breaking the hold without much effort. Why, you little? Hinata backed away, fueled by rage. Neji threw himself at her, attacking between feints and fake-outs, and took advantage of every instance she fell for one to disable the pressure point so that he could prolong the punishment, all while taunting her. Is this how you expect to be the head of our clan? She barely blocked a sidekick. Do you think you can change? He dodged 3 consecutive punches, rushing in until he was right in her face. Hinata braced for attack, eyes half scrunched. Frustration pooled in her until it burned too hot to ignore. Naruto's words from the beginning of the winter break bounced around in her mind. Become strong where it matters. Carry yourself in a way that you can be proud of and people like Nobu will never bother you again. Gritting her teeth, Hinata rebelled against all her instincts and rushed towards Neji. He froze, not for long, but it was enough for her to start an attack of her own. She kept herself compact, weaving around to throw and dodge from different angles. The shock on his face gave way to anger as he trailed back, hitting her so hard that her guard crumpled. It all went downhill from there. A strike to the shoulder took her left arm out of commission. Hinata tried her best to keep her edge, but she couldn't. Neji was bigger than her, stronger than her, and had so much hatred behind his attacks that she failed to mount any kind of defense. She toppled and fell onto the cold, wooden floor. Neji stood over her, flushed and panting in exertion. If this is your limit, how do you expect to fulfill your destiny as clan head? She met his cold, imperious gaze with something of her own, defiance. How I fulfill my destiny isn't up to why you, Neji. Her legs shook as she rose, but she did it anyway. If not to prove to herself that she could, then to prove her father and Neji wrong. Left arm hanging uselessly at her side, Hinata took a ready stance. Let's go again. Why you? Neji bit down on his lip, the veins around his eyes bulging. Enough. Her father surveyed them from his seat. I believe this match has come to an end. Neji bowed stiffly and exited the room. Deactivating her Byakugan, Hinata prepared herself for the usual tongue lashing. She straightened her posture and folded her arms in front of her. He towered over her, dark green kimono taking up the breadth of her vision. He raised his hand and Hinata squeezed her eyes shut to not see those judging eyes. A strange weight settled on the crown of her head. Well done, Hinata. She opened her eyes. Her father was smiling and he was smiling at her. It wasn't a big smile, barely an upturn in his lips, but the look in his eye was infinitely warmer than usual. Well done. Gasping in disbelief, Hinata hid her grin. Shikamaru was bored, not that it was anything new, but the thought came to mind more frequently these days. The novelty of starting school had worn off completely after the open day, which was just about the most interesting school had been. After the holidays, the focus had shifted more towards the shinobi side of their education, which was all well and good, but as the heir to the Naruto clan, there wasn't anything taught so far that he didn't already know. Even chakra theory. That being said, today's lesson was bound to be the least boring so far. After weeks of mind-numbing meditation in smoke-filled rooms with special chakra-conductive incense sticks, they were ready to begin doing chakra exercises. He looked around from his seat at the very back of the class. The excitement in the room was loud to a bothersome degree. It only grew when Aruka walked around with a tray full of leaves. Now that it was spring, a little greenery had returned to the village, which he supposed was why Aruka had picked now to begin with chakra exercises. He was a little interested in seeing what they'd be doing since his father promised to teach him the shadow imitation jutsu, or at least get him started on it, when the academy got him started on chakra exercises. Aruka cleared his throat from the front of the class. As usual, no one listened. Shikamaru covered his ears and counted down in his head. Hey. The classroom plummeted into silence. Thank you. Aruka put the tray on the front table. You know I don't like to yell at you all, but you give me no choice sometimes. Shikamaru sighed. When would the man learn that softening himself to the class would only let them take even more liberties with him? He shook his head and leaned back, forearms crossed and nestled beneath his head. It was none of his business anyway. Now that all of you have come into contact with your chakra thanks to the incense sticks, we'll be getting started on some chakra control exercises. I understand that not all of you will be able to do it at first. I've not brought incense sticks for a reason after all, but all of you will get it eventually. Choji hummed from beside him. Hey, Naruto, do you think that's true? Naruto looked up from his notebook. I guess, everyone managed to find their chakra with the incense sticks. The more chakra you have, the easier it is, but that wasn't a big problem before. It might take a while, but I don't think it'll be one now. He didn't look convinced and chewed his thumb nervously. Troublesome guy, Shikamaru muttered. Choji, your clan's sort of famous for having more chakra than average and you found your chakra pretty quickly before. Why are you worrying? But what if, Choji's worried brown eyes flashed. He leaned closer. What if I can't find it without the incense? He furrowed his brow in irritation. Sometimes, being Choji's friend was really annoying. Naruto patted his shoulder. Don't worry. Worst comes to worst, I'll help you. Promise? I promise, he grinned. When Aruka reached the end of the classroom, he placed a small tray of leaves in the center of their row. There weren't enough people in the class to fill out the massive auditorium, so they got the entire row to themselves. He smiled at 3 of them before stopping at Naruto. Listen, he whispered, careful not to raise his voice. Don't be too upset if you don't take to this so easily. You have larger chakra reserves than normal, so you'll find these next few months to be a bit harder than others. It's hard to control that much chakra at first. I know, sensei, said Naruto. It's nothing some effort won't fix, right? Aruka smiled. I guess I didn't have to worry, then. Shikamaru watched the exchange out of the corner of his eye, more bemused than anything else. With nothing to do in school but watch people, there were things he'd seen that most didn't. Their teachers, Aruka included, all had it out for Naruto at the beginning of the year. Some more vocally than others. Only Fujino went against the trend, but since they returned from the winter break a few months ago, she avoided him like the plague. Aruka did too until after the winter break. That entire deal confused him. Some teachers went from not liking him to liking him, some the opposite, and others made it clear they had a bone to pick with the blonde. Of course, all of this could be solved by just asking Naruto, but Shikamaru didn't want to. That would turn this from a headache into a full-blown, skull-squeezing migraine. If he wasn't in any immediate trouble, he wanted no part in it. Leaning over to Choji, he asked, what did Aruka say about the leaves? We're meant to stick them to us using chakra. His eyes widened in disbelief and sought out Naruto's for reassurance, only to find amusement. So long as you find your chakra again, you'll be fine, he said. Oh, what's wrong, Shikamaru? Isn't your clan famed for their chakra control? This shouldn't be hard for you, right? Shikamaru's head slumped against the desk. His defeated groan came out muffled between his arms. There. Choji patted his back, but it only made things worse. Scratch the day being boring. Now, it had just taken a downright troublesome turn. After 8 years of frolicking among weaklings and sycophants by day and running himself into the ground by night, his lifelong ambition was taking shape. His progress wasn't as fast as he would have liked. It wasn't fast at all, and while being the strongest among his age group would have been something to take pride in, he wasn't. When afternoon came and it was time to gather on the track field for shinobi exercises, Sasuke made sure to bring his game. Nothing less would suffice, not against Naruto Uzumaki. His face tugged into a frown. Not being the strongest was a pill that he couldn't manage to fully swallow. Sasuke deserved that, at least. He was the only one who dragged himself to the depths of exhaustion after class, conditioning his knuckles on training logs until his shins were clumps of angry, purple bruises and his knuckles were raw and bloody. Naruto, meanwhile, looked as if he hadn't a care in the world. He completed every task set to him with such laughable ease that Sasuke felt like he was doing everything wrong. He hated it. He hated how far above him Naruto seemed, and not just him, but the entire class. Gathered in 2 lines, they stood before Aruka and Mizuki. It was the former who spoke first. Afternoon everyone. Today, we'll be taking a break from the sparring and taijutsu training to start on something new. He waited for the buzz to die down. Shuriken and kunai training. Immediately someone raised their hand. Sensei. Aruka nodded. Do we have to learn both? No, he replied, but be careful of which you pick. After next week, you will effectively be barred from choosing a different one until next year. Well, you won't, but for your own sake, I strongly advise that you all pick one and stick to it, otherwise the final exams will become even harder. After answering a few more asinine questions, he took the kunai group to one side of the field whilst Mizuki took the rest. The blue-haired Chunin gave a basic demonstration of proper throwing technique to their group. Sasuke waited impatiently for it to be over. When it was his turn, he took a handful of blunted shuriken out of the wooden box and stood at the front of the line in front of the 3 target logs. He scanned over the white outline of a human torso painted on the log, picking out his targets. All lethal. Sasuke, Mizuki said, why don't you give us a demonstration? He smirked at the rising excitement from the sycophants behind him. If they wanted a show, then that's what they'd get. This wouldn't take long. He readied himself to throw, 2 other shuriken already prepared in his left hand. Sasuke froze with a surge of excitement from the other group. Oh, wow, amazing, free kunai? His head turned against his will. He walked in the direction of the cries and the rest of the group followed him out of curiosity, Mizuki included. They left the shade-covered grove and walked into the early summer sun across the field to the set of logs near the shrubs. Well done, Naruto, Aruka smiled. This can't have been your first time wielding kunai. Nah, I've been practicing with them for a while now. It's a shinobi's bread and butter. Sasuke looked at the log to see 3 kunai embedded in the painted man's head. They were arranged neatly in a single line, blades plunged into the wood. But you threw those simultaneously. I think you've been practicing for more than a while. Naruto laughed and rubbed the back of his neck, smiling at the praise heaped upon him by their mindless classmates. Sasuke walked away, seething. Seeing Naruto so proficient with kunai brought an unpleasant memory to mind. He tried to cast it away but it came back, creeping from the dark recesses of his mind. These days, Naruto reminded him too much of his accursed older brother. He treated everyone around him as if he knew something about the world that they didn't. It hit too close to home and the blonde being so proficient with kunai only cemented the comparison in his mind. The facts were laid bare to him over the 9 months he had attended the academy. Naruto was better than him. He was smarter, faster, stronger, and more skilled. Sasuke marched back to the alcove, followed by a quarter of the previous group and Mizuki. The targets he picked for himself seemed just a little further away than usual. He drew his arm back to aim. The shurikens weighed a tad more noticeable than before. He threw and embedded it more left than he would have liked. Grabbing 2, he threw again, hitting the target straight in the head. He had aimed for the chest and the throat. There was a quiet round of applause by the few stragglers who had returned with Sasuke. Mizuki walked to the log and dislodged the shuriken, returning them to the box. Well done, Sasuke. Your clan was famed for their shuriken techniques, so I thought you'd be an exemplary example. Sasuke's mouth tugged down at the reminder of Itachi. His gaze flickered towards Naruto who was still smiling away the praise and adoration. A bitter taste filled his mouth. Mizuki's next words barely registered, his eyes boring intensely at Naruto until he felt sick to the stomach. He scoffed and moved to the back of the line, watching his classmates miss the targets one after the other. Any superiority he felt over them was dwarfed by Naruto and not so far away. Each cheer for him boiled his blood. No one could be that flawless. No one. Chapter 1.99. Published by Web Novel. The Cycle of Hatred. A Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server. https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon. https://www.patreon.com/eternallyugen update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer. Barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. Chakra control was never going to be my strong suit. I knew this going in, and I would continue to remember it moving forward. After a certain point, there's such a thing as having too much chakra. Now, was I upset at having to do 10 times the work of everyone my age for a fraction of the progress? Maybe a little, but the distant thought of being to spam jutsu was too exciting not to be worth it. I was still pretty pissed off at how much trouble it was, though. The Academy's basic chakra control exercises just weren't cutting it. Believe me, I gave them more than the benefit of the doubt. But the gains from being able to stick leaves onto various parts of my body just wasn't worth the ridiculous amount of time spent doing so on my end. Hence my current venture. With a little under a month until my first graduation exam, I had to pull out all the stops to pass the chakra-related side of it. See, the win condition was to concurrently stick a leaf to my forehead as well as one on each palm, and let's just say that right now, things weren't exactly looking good. That aside, discovering my chakra reserves had to be the single most intoxicating experience in my life. Better than anything I'd ever experienced before. I mean, I knew I would probably have a lot of chakra, but it was almost ridiculous for me to have the reserves of a fully grown male at the age of 8. Which unfortunately meant that for me to pass all the end-of-year exams, I'd have to go beyond the basic chakra control exercises the academy had started us off on. Okay, I'm ready. Gingerly, I lifted my foot off the ground and planted it on the base of the tree trunk. Some of the bark was already cracked from previous attempts, despite my trying to minimize the chakra output. Sending chakra to the soles of my feet was sort of hit or miss as far as my control over it went. The problem wasn't sending it there, it was making sure I sent just enough to stick. Too much, which was really easy to do, and I'd go flying, but too little would mean I wouldn't stick at all. No running starts either. That made it all the easier to use too much chakra. Trust me, I tried. Hinata cleared her throat. Okay, Naruto, I'm ready. I took the first step, focusing solely on directing chakra to the bottom of my left foot. Then I took another step. Ignoring the pull of gravity, I seemed to remain mostly stable. I was shaking a little bit, but it wasn't anything alarming. How's my chakra looking? I asked her without looking back. I had to keep my focus, otherwise I would either fly or fall. It's alright, not what I describe as steady, but it doesn't look like you'll throw yourself off. She hummed. Maybe try a little more? I did, even if I felt like my already hair-trigger control of my chakra was beginning to slip. No flying yet, though. Another step and the apprehension in my chest loosened. The bark crackled under the weight of my foot, but I wasn't sure if that was because it was already weakened or because I was using too much chakra. I stopped, but Hinata didn't bring it up, so I continued. About halfway up the tree, I began to relax. My stiffened muscles eased on the clenching. I wasn't immediately messing up, so I could afford to find out what made this work. Maintaining a firm grasp over the chakra, I drew my focus inwards. Getting my feet to stick to the bark was like using a broken faucet. If I turned it even an inch too far, the water, or my chakra, rather, would surge out, which wouldn't be a problem, but bear in mind the feet aren't the best for fine chakra control. What I needed to find was that sweet spot. Not too much or little, but just right. My hope was I'd be able to train my chakra control adequately enough that I wouldn't have to worry about it for a while. Not because finding myself inferior to a bunch of preteens stung. I think I'm starting to get it. Hey, Hinata. I twisted my neck back. The sleeves of her white and purple hoodie were rolled up and her left hand hovered in front of her face, drawing attention to the veins bulging against the sides of her silvery gray eyes. And Naruto, I think you should stop using so much. I had an inkling as to what she was saying when the bark under my foot let out a sharp snap. Cutting off the chakra flow to my feet wasn't even enough to save me. A small explosion sent me hurtling backwards and I barely made out the worry on Hinata's face among the rest of the world rushing past. Thankfully, it wasn't as violent as the first few times I'd tried this last week. I leaned my neck forward to right myself just as I touched down. The soles of my shoes ground against the earth. I stopped sliding and tipped over to my back. Not the best landing nor the most stellar technique to minimize damage, but I hadn't sprained anything, or worse, broken a limb. Everything else I could live with. Hey, are you okay? I mean, my shins are pretty raw and I'd rather that not happen, but if it wasn't for you, I would have been worse off. Oh, she smiled a little. That's good, then. That's, great. Hey, do you want to? Hinata's voice trailed and she stopped making eye contact. I sighed. For all the strides and confidence she had made, there was this odd hero worship directed towards me that often left her like, well, this when asking for something. That said, I was infinitely grateful that it was hero worship and not a crush. The former, I could deal with. The latter would make our already strange friendship very, very awkward. Plus, if she did develop a crush on me, I would have been worried given the fact that it would have been because I crushed her already pitiful self-esteem. Hiding my wince, I rose and brushed the grass and dead twigs off my clothes. That nightmare threw the entire day off kilter. I still felt bad about how I snapped at her, even now. I think I'll call it quits for today, which really meant I'd take a break to do it later, so we can get to sparring. If you're up for it, that is. The grin she sent my way almost forced me to consider rescinding the offer. Ever since her shift in mindset that day, Hinata's taijutsu prowess had spiked. Or rather, her newfound confidence allowed her to take full advantage of the skills she already had. It wasn't an instant thing. Her even asking to train with me took an entire month, but almost half a year later, she was fighting Sakura for Kunoichi of the year, and only because of academics. Her fighting style was much more aggressive now, which made her an even harder problem to deal with than Sasuke, in my opinion. Sasuke's style was laid back and relied on fast, precise counters and deducing patterns. I could get by through outthinking him or simply not giving him time to think. Hinata's style, on the other hand, was built for close-quarter combat. She would trap punches, smother kicks, and overwhelm me by not letting me do much of anything. But I was all the better for sparring with her. She might not have been using all of her clan's techniques, but there were things I was learning from fighting her that let me refine my own style, like the trapping, for one. We moved to an open clearing in one of the village's many public parks and I drew a decently sized circle around us using a stick. Academy rules: submission, ko, or ring out. I took a ready stance a moment after Hinata. We didn't need a countdown. The two of us formed the seal of confrontation and met in the middle of the ring. I was on the defensive from the get-go. She forced me to block a flurry of palm strikes while I struggled to find my footing. I backed away, throwing out a jab to earn some space, and to my credit, it worked. I barely grazed her forehead but succeeded in stopping her advance for a moment. I danced on the balls of my feet, shifting my weight from left to right before exploding into a driving knee with the weight of my entire body behind it. Hinata blocked with a wince and I followed up with an elbow to the temple. She buckled forward, head over chest and, seeing an opportunity to end the fight, I wrapped an arm around the nape of her neck to choke her into unconsciousness. She thrashed in my grip, chin digging painfully into my forearm. After an eternity of struggle, she threw her weight to the side and pulled her head out from between my arms. We broke apart, huffing but still on our toes. Gulping down one last bit of air, I clenched my jaw and blitzed in, layering heavy body blows and the occasional knee between lightning-fast jabs. Hinata's eyes darted about like balls in a pinball machine, following each of my hits as they came. She countered with immediate precision, and without her Byakugan activated. I took several palm strikes to my stomach, and at the rate this was going, I'd end up taking a deep breath and lose the fight. My tongue was as dry as sandpaper and my throat wasn't much better. Ahead of me, Hinata's shoulders barely rose and fell. Her pale, heart-shaped face glistened with sweat and was flushed an energetic shade of red. With a momentary pause over, the fight reset and we met in the middle. She offered an open palm facing skyward, left leg placed in front of right. Her right hand crossed over the left side of her chest and the other hovered out in front of her. Bracing my feet, I mirrored her stance and placed the back of my wrist against the inner part of hers. She pushed and so did I, neither of us giving any ground to the other. I leaned into her using my wrist and stumbled when the rock-steady opposition from Hinata faltered for just an instant. She flourished her wrist, placing mine firmly in the grip of her hand and yanking it down. Cold air whistled in my left ear. I ducked towards her and slipped past the blow, though not before the edge of Hinata's palm glanced my face. 2 more strikes followed. I ducked again and blocked, careful not to get my feet tangled as we danced around the ring. It was a careful game of cat and mouse on the boundary of the circle drawn around us. Sometimes, I was the mouse with my foot on the line and other times, it would be Hinata. We exchanged so many blows that I could feel the bruises beginning to form, each a negligible weight slowing my punches and kicks, but together, they were beginning to take their toll. Lungs burning for air, I stepped in. She struck out with a front kick I snaked around, lashing her lead thigh with a calf kick when it touched down. Despite the limp to her step, she charged and released a storm of punches at my midsection. I shoved her away. If I had done this earlier, she probably would have countered and knocked me out, but we were in too deep to be capable of anything besides the very basics. Again, the fight paused. This time, our breaths were audible, endlessly deep and frequent, as if not even all the air in the world would be enough for our lungs. Fighting Hinata was a crash course in Wing Chun all over again. It refined my cobbled-together style and ironed it out a tad, not just with her, but with everyone I sparred. Fighting Choji and Kiba, I learned the value of my sheer physicality. Fighting Sasuke and Shikamaru, when he could be bothered, kept my mind sharp, a pretty hard thing to do when I was around children all day. The sources of inspiration from my jack-of-all-trades taijutsu style came from fading memories and experiences etched into another body. Now, I was pulling bits and pieces from everyone I fought with a style worth observing to create my own. It wouldn't be complete for a while, not until I had it pass through the critical hands of whoever would be my Jonin-sensei, but it was certainly starting to take off. Taking a spar with the Hyuga heiress to a standstill was enough evidence of that. How about we bring this to an end? Yeah. I huffed. Hinata smiled a little and nodded. Mustering up one final surge of energy, we charged forwards, matching punch for punch and kick for kick. I let her set the pace of the final exchange, focusing on keeping myself compact and avoiding her blisteringly fast strikes. Even now, when we were beaten black and blue, her form was still textbook. The wind swirled in my ears, the sound dizzying me as I ducked, pivoted, and trailed out of range. I ignored the sting of my dry throat as I swallowed, focusing on the thrum of my racing heart. There had to be a pattern within her overwhelming offense, some kind of tell to her moves now that we were running on fumes. I smothered my frustration when I couldn't find one. Hinata had probably been sparring with her cousin under the watchful eye of her father by now. There was no way Hiyashi Hyuga would allow that kind of flaw in his daughter's taijutsu, not with how prideful he was. No, I was only wasting what little energy I had left like this and had basically handed Hinata all the momentum. I stamped down and slapped away a lead palm strike, eyes flickering between her poised backhand and her front leg. Which would she choose, a kick or a punch? The distance between us was wide enough that she'd be able to pull off either. I met her eyes and committed to a course of action. If I was wrong, I would lose, and that would be that. Hinata shuffled back, chambering her lead leg to snap at me on the way in. I was going too fast to come out completely unscathed, so I weaved to the right, tensing my stomach. Her foot slammed into the left side of my body, heel digging painfully into my ribs. But that was it, too tired and too slow to load up anything particularly damaging. She was nowhere near as fresh as she was at the start. Using my momentum from the attempt to dodge, I spun around and slammed my elbow into her. The world jolted. My head felt like dead weight as I landed the blow, stumbling off to the side. I regained my footing and shook off the sense of vertigo, expecting Hinata to rush at me at any moment. She lay sprawled on the ground, halfway between sitting and lying. What's wrong? She gasped for air. I win. I blinked and looked down at my left foot rooted to the ground halfway outside the ring. Now that's some bullshit, I muttered under my breath and walked over to her, holding out my hand. Since we said academy rules, congrats. You beat me fair and square, Hinata. She shot me a million-watt smile and completed the seal of reconciliation. I sat beside her, silent while I waited for the throbbing to die down. I couldn't quite tell how beat up we were yet, but we had gone pretty hard at it. The bruises in a few hours would give us a more definitive answer, though. It wouldn't be a good answer, but an answer nonetheless. The faster the bruises formed, the longer they'd take to heal. Well, at least the ointment Hinata usually brought with her would help with that. We sat in the field and dissected the fight while it was still fresh in our heads. It was clear to both of us that I tended to fight passively when things got tough. Not that it was a negative thing per se, but I was too content with letting my opponent move me around. Hinata delivered this information with a small smile on her face that, on any other person, would have infuriated me. Right, your turn, I said. You did pretty damn good today. By your fighting style, I'm guessing you want to become a close-range taijutsu fighter, right? She nodded. Initially, anyway, father suggested it. I can always learn more things in the future so long as my foundation is good. Solid advice. Pace-wise, you dictated most of the fight, but you don't tend to think ahead. How so? As shinobi, thinking one step ahead is standard. We've got to not only think about what our opponent will do but how they'll react to our counters and then act accordingly. Hinata peered at me with intrigue and I continued, you know the elbow I hit you with at the end? It's because I guessed what you were going to do first, but I could only guess that because I've grown used to how you fight. So, Hinata cocked her head, the beginning of a thought gleaming in her eyes. You could guess what I do because I'm too obvious? Should I keep some skills hidden to give me the advantage? I wouldn't say you're obvious in general, because you're not. I've just fought you too many times so you're obvious to me. Naruto, do you have skills that you keep hidden? I smiled. On the one hand, some would argue that I did. My knowledge of Hinata's taijutsu style didn't come from my knowledge of the gentle fist, but that of Wing Chun. In the same way, the majority of my taijutsu style had a basis in otherworldly martial arts. Skills whose origin I kept hidden, so to speak. You could say so, I said. She bowed her head in acceptance. Upon completing our morning training session, we applied her strange-smelling ointment to our aching limbs and returned to the village in search of food. In other words, ramen. Unlike Ken and Naruto, I didn't eat the stuff too often. Once every week was usually enough for me, but I felt like breaking the rule today. Taking Hinata through the back of the shop, I dropped off my stuff. We ate a quick lunch and left. Today was my day off, and since it was the height of rush hour, Tucci and Ayame were too busy to stop by. Microwaved or otherwise, the food was still good. As usual, I walked Hinata to her clan compound, stopping at the base of the footpath leading to the front gates. The two usual guards fixed me with their usual stares, though they never used their Byakugan on me, so props to them. The veins around those eyes did unsettle me. Hinata, I called after her. She stopped turning around. Are you coming to hang out with Shikamaru and Choji later? Her eyes darted between me and the guards. I don't know, my father. I might be busy, Naruto. Sorry. I sighed, a little disappointed. Don't get me wrong, I appreciated the value of hard work, but apart from her training sessions with me in the school day at the academy, Hinata didn't have much of a social life. And if there was one thing she needed, it was to get out and talk to more people. Do you think he'll let you leave if you finish your work fast? Maybe. A measure of hope pooled in her eyes. Okay, I won't make any promises, but I'll do my best to meet you guys near the great tree at 5. Then, she cast her gaze down. But in case I can't, tell Shikamaru and Choji I'm sorry, okay? Hey, I lightly shoved her shoulder. Don't beat yourself up over it. If you make it, and if you don't, you don't. We'll see you on Monday anyway. Hinata nodded, a little less upset than before. I waved her off until she disappeared behind the giant black gates, leaving me alone on the footpath. One of the guards shouted from the top of the path. Get lost, kid. Just 'cause you're friends with the young lady, doesn't mean we'll let you loiter. Well, not completely alone. I turned around and yelled at the top of my lungs, up yours, bastards. Before they could chase me off their property, I clambered onto a nearby wall and took off running, streaking across the rooftops and market stalls with my laughter still on the wind. An hour later, I was on the other side of the village, waiting to see if she would be able to make it. The market stalls ringed around the base of the great tree were lit up with various lanterns. A stream of people flowed in or out through the single, wide path leading away from the tree. Shikamaru, Choji, and I sat on one of 4 benches parked at its base, legs dangling over the ground. Man, Shikamaru yawned again. Why are we here again? I didn't respond and continued staring out at the path for Hinata. Choji crunched on a handful of chips, making a frustrated noise at the back of his throat. We had been waiting out here for nearly 20 minutes now. Even I was starting to get bored of it. I don't think Hinata will be coming, so can we go? Choji looked a little guilty, but if he disagreed, he didn't say anything. I hummed. We'll wait for a few more minutes. After that, we can go. Shikamaru leaned back and closed his eyes. The minutes stretched on, and my hopes of Hinata appearing began to thin. I sighed and got up. She usually didn't manage to come to our little gatherings, but today's one was special. It was probably going to be the last one before our final exams for the year, but time was up. Where are we going, Naruto? Choji tossed his empty bag into a nearby bin and caught up with us. I dunno, it's not like we do anything but wander around anyway. He nodded in acceptance and the 3 of us set off on the footpath that funneled out to the rest of the village. We stopped at the familiar cry, turning to see Hinata, decked out in her usual white and light purple hoodie and jogging bottoms, sprinting up the path. Wait. I broke out into a grin. Nice that you could make it. She smiled. Half an hour late, mind you, Shikamaru interjected with his voice as bland and usual. Shikamaru, Choji tugged at his sleeve. He didn't break eye contact with her, his gleaming gaze firmly locked on Hinata. She frowned for a moment before sighing, I know and I'm sorry. Father really wouldn't let me go. What changed his mind? I convinced him that the four of us are going to do some last-minute revision for the exams. Choji's face twitched. Are we? Goddamn it, Shikamaru groaned, face in hand. I laughed at the both of them. Well, chances are, we'll probably have to do it now. Sorry you too, but Hinata's dad's the type to have people follow her around. You don't want her to get into trouble, do you? Hinata looked crestfallen and fiddled with the sleeves of her hoodie instead of looking at us. Choji gave me a slow but firm nod. We turned to Shikamaru, intense but silently pleading. All right, fine, he said, but don't expect me to actually do any work. Typical, I said, but fine. Honestly, Shikamaru, I don't like work either, but at least I try to do it. They quickly began arguing and continued down the footpath. I caught something about minimum effort for maximum results before they moved out of earshot. Let's get going, Hinata. She blinked at me, nodding slowly. We walked a few paces behind them so we wouldn't get roped into their argument, but close enough that we could hear it all. Naruto, you know we don't have to revise, right? We can do something more fun. Me forcing you to because of something I said wouldn't be fair. I kept walking with a smile. If my father brings it up, I'll take the punishment. I did lie to him. Ahead of us, Shikamaru threw up his hands in annoyance. Naruto. I turned. It's fine, we're your friends, after all. Or rather, I am, but Shikamaru and Choji will come around. If you can't rely on me to get you out of a tough spot, then who can you rely on? Thank you. She bowed her head to hide her smile. Not so sure about Shikamaru, though. The boy in question turned around. What was that? Hinata looked at each other and shared a silent laugh. Nothing. Chapter 1.10, Published by Web Novel. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto SI. A Naruto self-insert. There is little else more agonizing than seeing your parents massacred by the very beast sealed within your stomach. Throw in the knowledge that you'll have to coexist with that same beast, fully aware that its decision to kill your parents was wholly its own, and you'll understand how I feel. It doesn't help that the only person I can talk to about it refuses to tell me anything at all. Discord server, https://discord.gg/jzkdr72jtr Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/eternal update schedule. I'll be updating this FIC once a week every Friday. If you'd like to stay a chapter ahead of public release, consider looking at the Patreon. Disclaimer, barring my own OCs, original characters, I do not own any of the characters in this story nor do I own the rights to the Naruto franchise. I am but a lowly fan, expressing his love for the stories that he grew up with. Want to read ahead? Head over to Patreon, Eternal Eugen. The link is on my profile too. Note, everything on there will be public eventually. I shook out my slightly numb limbs and flexed my wrist. With one exam down and 2 more to go, my chances of graduating as Rookie of the Year were looking pretty good. The graduation exams would take the entire school day. We'd just finished the written exam, leaving only the physical and chakra control tests. Did you do okay? I think I did well, I said. How about you? Choji sighed. I think I passed. And ain't that a miracle? Shikamaru laughed and pushed him. Choji yelled in mock anger and grabbed hold of him. Hinata caught us at the base of the staircase as whispering groups rushed around us, ready to enjoy the half-hour break we'd been given between the written exams and the chakra control test. We walked around the main playground, past the climbing frame, and found a set of benches hidden under the shadow of a tree. Choji and I sat on one while Hinata and Shikamaru took a seat on the bench opposite ours. How did you do, Hinata? Choji asked. I'm happy. I didn't do amazingly well, but I didn't fail either. We all looked at Shikamaru. Why are you looking at me for? How'd you do? I asked. I probably did all right. All right, he says, Choji sighed. Watch when we get our grades during the holidays only to find that he scored first. If he does, I'm going to be very offended, I said. Shikamaru snorted. Why? I looked at Hinata, who looked at Choji, who then looked back at me, an entire conversation passing in an instant. I guess I'll say it, I said. Shikamaru, do you have any hobbies? Yeah, why? Humor me, what's your hobby? I play shogi sometimes. I grinned. That checks out. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? Don't worry. Anyway, I'll be generous and say that you've dedicated quite a lot of effort to learning the best plays, right? I guess so. One day, say I come along, barely look at the rules, and trounce you. How would you feel? He furrowed his brow. Not good. That's how we feel when it comes to you, said Hinata. You're either asleep half the time or staring out the window. So, Shikamaru threw up his hands. I guess I'm just smarter than you all. I shrugged. You probably might be, but I'm going to make sure you score second on academics. He shot to his feet. It's not enough that you've beaten all of us black and blue at some point? You can't let me have this? Choji laughed and Hinata covered her mouth to muffle hers. Nope, I grinned. Until you start putting more than just the minimum effort, no can do. He sat down with a huff, muttering to himself through folded arms. Oh, yeah, Choji shrugged off his bag and fumbled through it. I brought some snacks. Well, my ma gave me some snacks, because I knew that this written test was gonna be tough. He pulled out 4 bags of paprika-flavored crisps, a pack of bottled juice cartons, and some fruit. I glanced at Shikamaru. He shrugged and reached over, grabbing one of everything, and Hinata thanked Choji before doing the same. Thanks, man, I said. No problem, he smiled. Food is made to be shared. We finished our snacks and chatted for a while before we were forced to head back in. From what Iruka had told us, the chakra control tests would be a little more laid back than the written exams, which was obvious since we all knew what the test would be a month in advance. This time, everyone sat at the front of the class, meaning the first 3 rows were packed. Iruka entered a little later with a piece of paper in hand. When I call your name, get up and follow me. I'll be taking you to the chakra control test. Hanoka Abe. A silver-haired girl stood up, peering about unsurely. Iruka opened the door and left with her, and when it closed behind them, the room exploded with nervous whispers that persisted until the 2 returned. How'd you do? Someone asked. Iruka cleared his throat. No talking about the test until after you've all done it. Those are the rules. Next, Choji Akimichi. Choji rose stiffly. I'll do my best. Good, Iruka smiled. The 2 of them exited the room. This happened at least a dozen more times until it was my turn. Some returned with smiles on their faces, but not everyone did. I wasn't too nervous, all things considered. At the end of the day, every single exam we would do today assessed how much effort we were willing to put in over both a long and short period of time. I'd done both, meaning unless something went terribly wrong, my success was guaranteed. The classroom door slid open, revealing Iruka and Sasuke. He ignored the invitations from various girls in our class to sit next to him and returned to the very end of the first row. Naruto Uzumaki. I stood up and turned to my 3 friends. Wish me luck. Like you'll need it. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. Shoji and Hinata frowned at him, and I heard the beginnings of an argument just as the door closed. Iruka led me down the hall, turning onto the staircase and going up. I followed him wordlessly. He glanced back at me every so often, as if to convince himself that I was still there. Naruto, he said. I'll give you the same advice I've given everyone before you. Keep a cool head. Our chakra and how well we can control it depends a lot on our emotions. If you're nervous or scared, you won't be able to control your chakra well. I get that you might be nervous, but it will not help you. I nodded. It all made sense judging from what I read up on chakra theory. We reached an unremarkable door that looked the same as any other that we passed on the way here. Iruka stood to the side. I'll be waiting here. Taking a breath, I knocked twice. There was no response. I looked at Iruka. He gave me an encouraging nod and I entered a typical classroom. High windows stretched across the left side and all the tables and chairs had been pushed to the back of the class, except for one table in the center of the room with 2 chairs on either end. An old man, probably the invigilator, sat on the side facing the door. He had wrinkled skin, tanned a deep bronze. His kind eyes were pinched almost shut, but I could just about make out warm brown eyes. He looked more like a kind old man than a shinobi, but then again, being a shinobi meant exercising secrecy, so I guess that was the point. Good morning, young man. I looked at the clock hanging at the back of the class. It read 11:45. That couldn't be true because when I left my homeroom, it was 12:15. It's afternoon, actually, so good afternoon. He smiled without looking back to see if I was right. I stand corrected. What is your name? Naruto Uzumaki, I said, taking the only other seat in the room. And yours, sir? Sir, he smiled. The youth are kinder than used to be these days, it seems. My name is Kosuke Maruboshi, pleased to meet your acquaintance. The name didn't ring any bells, which must have shown on my face because Maruboshi laughed. You wouldn't know me, young man. My time was long before you. Not even your sensei would know of me if I was not on a C-rank mission with him some years ago. I took in his wizened features. He was probably about as old as Lord Third, maybe a little older or younger, give or take. Did you fight alongside Lord Third or something? Maruboshi let out a low, rumbling laugh. Isn't that a roundabout way of calling me old? I scratched my cheek. You don't exactly look like you're in the prime of your life. Kids these days are something else, he chuckled. To answer your question, yes, I had the honor of fighting alongside Lord Sarutobi long ago, but enough about me. Today, it is all about you. Are you ready to begin? Yes, sir. Maruboshi nodded encouragingly. Good. Please perform the leaf sticking exercise. One on your forehead and one on the palm of each hand. I started by sticking one leaf to my forehead, drawing a thin stream of chakra from the center of my body to my head. When I pulled my hand away, the leaf remained. I did the same to the palms of my hand, spreading my fingers and facing my hands down. He wrote something down on a clipboard and smiled. Very good. With this, your test is complete, unless there is anything else you wish to show me. I weighed up the options in my head. Thanks to the tree walking exercise, my chakra control was pretty decent, and while I wouldn't show him that I could walk up solid surfaces, there wasn't any harm in taking the leaf sticking exercise further. Actually, yes, there is. I returned the leaves to the tray before plunging all 10 of my fingers into the box. Breathing in, I directed thinner streams of chakra to the tips of my fingers before showing them to the invigilator. Does this count? I asked. Maruboshi smiled. It does. What superb chakra control. Rest assured that you have the best chakra control that I have seen thus far. Well done, young man, well done indeed. Thank you. Now, unless there's something else you wish to show me, you may leave. I shook my head. No, that'll be all. Have a good day. I waved Maruboshi goodbye and opened the door. Aruka turned around the instant the door clicked open. Are you finished? I nodded and we walked side by side for a few minutes. You took longer than everyone else, he finally said. I was getting to know Mr. Maruboshi. He's interesting. Aruka smiled. He sure is. I was on a C-rank mission with him a few years ago. He's got a bit of a reputation in the village. He does? He does. They call him the Eternal Genin, the Leaf's strongest Genin, and the unkillable old man. That first one, is it because he's weak or because he's old? Aruka laughed. He's definitely not weak, that's for sure. I've heard that he's refused every promotion to Jonin for some reason. He opened the door to the stairwell for me. Maybe you'll run a mission with him once you're a Genin. I'd like that. He seems nice, I replied. The exams continued long into the afternoon, with the physical section being some kind of assault course, followed by a 20-minute break, marksmanship using either shuriken or kunai, and now, shinobi kumite. As we had throughout this past year, we were all standing around Aruka, but, unlike the usual relaxed buzz, there was a hanging silence. The sort where you wait for it to drop and put an end to the stomach-clenching nerves, except it doesn't. Mizuki was also present under the shade of a tree with a clipboard. More so than with anyone else, I was carefully neutral in all my interactions with him, whether or not I perceived any animosity. I was the most nervous around him, but he didn't do much else beyond the occasional sneer when he thought I wasn't looking. While I knew he was going to betray the leaf and run to Orochimaru, I didn't see how he'd achieve it besides doing something monumentally stupid. His way in would have been me, probably relying on my relationship with Lord Third to get me into the Hokage's office, but since I wasn't failing the academy, I was left scratching my head. There was also the distant possibility of him banding up with Kabuto, and God knows what he was doing besides spamming the Chunin exams twice a year. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he scribbled something onto the clipboard. At least, I did, until someone snapped their fingers in front of my face. I blinked and swatted the hand away. Are you back with us? Aruka raised an eyebrow. I pulled my lips into a tight line. My focus slipped. Sorry, sir. I know that it's been a busy day, but keep your wits for this last test and then you'll be on vacation for 3 months. Just because you've been doing well all year, doesn't mean you can slack off. He looked around the class. That goes for all of you, all right? The class slipped some energy into their reply, causing Aruka to smile. He called up the first pair to spar, drawing a bigger than normal circle around them. A girl from one of the minor clans, Fumi was her name, I think, and a guy called Taro. Their fight wasn't pretty, nor was it quick. They threw mostly telegraph punches and had the poor habit of letting each other get up after being sent to the ground. Eventually, Taro stepped outside the ring and, whether intentional or not, Fumi won the fight. The second fight was identical to the first, and it was the same for the fourth and fifth fights. The sixth was a bit more interesting since Sabo was fighting. He was a repeater from the year before. While all his classmates went up to the second year, he was forced to redo the year because, in his words, he goofed. With another year to polish practically everything about him, Sabo was pretty great at taijutsu. Not as good as Sasuke or Hinata, but he often fought Kiba to a standstill. Looking at this understanding of the academy's basic taijutsu style, he knew it in and out. It was all muscle memory for him, which the vast majority of our class lacked. Of course, I was ignoring the obvious fact that Sabo was a year older, taller, and stronger than Ino. She didn't look too thrilled to be up against him. As the head of what I taken to calling the Sasuke fan club, Ino didn't care very much about anything at school besides socializing and trying to win Sasuke's heart, so Sabo had a pretty distinct advantage over her. But before Aruka could start the match, she raised her hand. What's wrong, Ino? Aruka asked. Are you giving up? No, I wanted to ask if we can use jutsu. Jutsu? Aruka frowned and glanced at Mizuki, who shrugged back. While there's no rule explicitly forbidding it, none of you know, or should know, any jutsu at this point. We've been working on your chakra control and teaching you hand signs, but you won't learn jutsu until next year. Though, I suppose we can't stop your parents from teaching you. The worry melted off her face and she danced on the balls of her feet. What? Sabo threw up his hands. How is that fair? If you had passed with the rest of your class last year, Sabo, you wouldn't be here, Aruka replied, his voice dry. You also have an advantage over everyone because you got to cover everything twice. Seeing the blood in the water, Ino clasped her hands together. Please, sir, if this is my graduation exam, I want to do my best and that means leaving it all in here. Aruka wrangled with his thoughts for a minute, his face set in deep thought. He nodded slowly and began the match. That being said, he inched towards the ring, worry clear on his face. I wanted to scream as I watched Sabo stand there and stare at Ino. This was his final exam, not a sparring session, and even if it wasn't, no one in the right mind would let someone prepare a jutsu to use against them and just watch. As she finished the hand seals, I began to understand why exactly it was Sabo didn't graduate. Mind transfer jutsu. Since Sabo hadn't moved at all, he got caught in Ino's jutsu, stiffening up before going completely slack and walking out of the ring. Shinobi Kumite is now over. Make the unison seal and leave the ring. Aruka shook his head wryly, looking down at the clipboard to see who was next. Iori and Matsuda. Shikamaru? I asked. He pulled his gaze away from the ring. What is it? Since Ino can use her clan's jutsu, am I right in assuming you can do the same with yours? Man, his lips tugged up in a smirk. I dunno. Me telling you would be a damn stupid thing to do. Choji was too absorbed in both his nerves and the current match to hear him, but Hinata did. She sighed and fixed him with a withering stare. You might not be paired with him. I don't know that yet, he replied. Unlike you two, I'm not great at taijutsu, so I need as many cards stacked in my favor as possible. By the time we were done, the match was over. I didn't see if it was won through submission or ring out, but it was probably submission based on how dirty the two's clothes were. Choji. He yelped. Iruka looked square in his direction as a few people laughed, and Naruto. Horrified, Choji twisted his neck to look at me. All the blood drained from his face when I gave him a small smile. Shikamaru's laughter didn't help much, but Hinata quickly shut him up. We walked into the ring. Choji was in front of me, shoulders hunched and neck bent. He was never the most confident of people, and Iruka putting him up against the best taijutsu user in his class wasn't doing him any favors. Whether or not I was the best taijutsu user in our class was pretty debatable, but nobody could claim to have even half the endurance and stamina I possessed. Even my recovery time was far shorter than the other kids. It was probably the most important factor in my current progress because being able to consistently push out more training per day meant more progress. Iruka walked into the center of the ring, standing directly between us. I shot him a quizzical look, but he stayed stone-faced. Make the seal of confrontation. We did, though Choji's hand was visibly shaking. Begin. To his credit, Choji moved towards me. His punch was stiff, and so telegraphed that I stopped, caught it and pulled him in by the arm. He was hyperventilating in my ear and I squeezed his shoulder. Listen, I hissed. We don't have time to have a conversation. Choji, calm down. This is a spar and you're still my friend. I won't beat the hell out of you just because you've been matched against me. How the hell am I supposed to win? You're not, but as a shinobi, there'll be plenty of fights we can't win. Choji teeth ground together. Then what do I do, Naruto? Don't go down easy and make it clear to Iruka you did your best. With nothing more to say, I shoved Choji away and took my stance. Choji did the same, looking a great deal less nervous than before. This time, I made the first move and edged in until I was tentatively in range. I was a short kid, so there weren't many people I was taller than. Practically all the girls were taller than me and so were the vast majority of boys, so Choji had the physical advantage here. All I could hope was that he didn't recognize it and push the pace. I shifted angles, letting my fist fly and slip between Choji's guard. He took the hits and winced, shuffling around to keep me in view. I watched him tighten his backhand, but he didn't move it. Instead, I was forced to slip away from his lead hand. It was so close to hitting my nose that I felt a heaviness on my brow. Good, that was good. If Choji was calm enough to plan like that, I didn't have to worry about him giving the teachers a poor showing, and I also didn't have to worry about him not making it to the second year. After that, the fight was relatively straightforward. It wasn't the most exhilarating fight, but I made sure not to hold back too much. Choji being my friend was one thing, and I was certain that Iruka knew I was holding back a little, but if I made it too blatant, he would have to do something about it. So, I let the fight go on until I was sure Choji was able to show a decent amount and then went in for the finish. Over the handful of exchanges, his confidence grew so much that when he stepped in for the last time, he did so pretty carelessly. I darted in to meet him, grabbing his lead arm and positioning my feet to throw him over my hip. He thudded into the dirt and I locked his arm with my knee on his hip to make sure he couldn't escape. Surrender, Choji, it's over. He gritted his teeth. I won't. I tightened the lock and he whimpered. All right, I surrender. Iruka called at the end of the match and we left the ring as the next pair walked past us. The rest of the matches flew by. Sasuke beat Kiba in under 2 minutes, Hinata beat someone else even faster, and Shikamaru won his match by also having his opponent walk out of the ring. Iruka was pretty ticked off that he couldn't judge either's performance, but since he'd allowed Ino to use the mind transfer jutsu, he couldn't stop Shikamaru from using the shadow bind jutsu either. A crowd of worried parents stood at the gate when school was over. Hinata and Shikamaru wished me goodbye with the promise that we'd do something during the holiday. Choji did the same, but before he could go, I grabbed his shoulder. What is it? He asked. I let go of his shoulder. I was wondering, since Ino and Shikamaru could use their clan's jutsu, can you? And if so, why didn't you use it when you fought me? He scratched his cheek, turning away from me. I don't have enough chakra yet. It's good for me that you don't, cause if you could use it, I probably would have lost. Choji snorted. I'm serious. I pushed him a little. I don't know any jutsu, at all. Could you imagine me trying to dodge a massive fist? He started to laugh, which was great because I could see that the exams were still bothering him. Go on, I said. Your parents are waiting for you. Okay, and Naruto? What is it? He turned around and gave me an awkward hug. I didn't stop him or anything, but it was still a little awkward. Thank you. I patted his back a few times. No worries. I'll see you soon. Have a great summer, all right? He ran down the steps and joined his parents. A man who looked like his father scooped him up and roared in laughter. All around me, I watched happy parents embrace their children. As much of a bad idea as it was, I began to wonder what it would have been like if my parents were here. Someone put a hand on my shoulder. I didn't need to see who it was because their next word said it all. Don't dwell. It makes it worse. Trust me. Sensei, does it get better? He sighed and patted my shoulder. Seeing all this? No, not really, but having friends does help. I nodded. We stayed like this for a while, both of us watching the happy families wander home. Once everyone was gone, I turned around and gave Iruka a sincere bow. We might not have got off to a very good start, but he'd proven that he wasn't out to get me. Thanks for teaching me. He smiled and the scar on his face wrinkled. Don't worry about it. Have a good holiday. When I got home, I was surprised to find an envelope on my welcome mat. I rarely got any letters, besides random restaurant brochures. Everything to do with my housing situation was managed by whatever institution in the village's management dealt with orphans. I picked it up and left my shoes on the mat behind me. The fact that I got a letter at all made me curious enough to disregard doing much else, so I sat on the only couch I owned and ripped it open. Dear Naruto, I've sat on this letter for a while, trying to figure out the best way to communicate this to you. You have no parents I can come to, so I decided to put it off until the end of the year. I've asked the people you're close with and I'm writing this letter because of what I learned from them, that you were much smarter than you let on. I allowed my personal feelings to overcome my responsibilities as your teacher. As of this letter reaching you, I have resigned as a teacher at the academy and surrendered myself to Lord Third's judgment. While he was certainly more merciful than he should have been, I have returned to active service with a fine and a year of border patrol as punishment. I deserve far worse and was more than ready to accept imprisonment. There is so much I wish I could tell you to rid myself of this guilt, but I cannot. Despite what everyone says, you are a child. I'm writing this to apologize in the only way I'm able to. Doing so in person, were it not forbidden by Lord Third, isn't something I think I'm up to right now. Looking you in your eyes and admitting exactly what it is I did makes me sick to my stomach. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I ask for it anyway. Regards. Fujino Shimizu. I read the letter twice before I set it down. It had been so long since that fiasco that I'd cast her from my mind. She made it easy to do by pretty much ignoring my existence. Reading the letter, I expected myself to feel something. Anger, hatred, pity, anything. But I didn't. The only thing I left, as I sat there on my couch, was the exhaustion, mental and physical, from the day's events. Maybe it was strange of me, but I didn't care what Fujino experienced to make her hate me in the same way I could care less if a shop barred me from entering. I was curious as to why Lord Third never said anything about her. He had come to give me my stipend last week but hadn't mentioned a thing. Though he did ask how I was finding school, that was part of our usual routine. Scanning the letter one more time, I swallowed at the strange sense of detachment. I wouldn't be seeing Fujino after this year, and while she did admit her guilt to the Hokage, I didn't care. I expected to feel some kind of vindication or contentment that she was at least being punished, but I didn't. Fujino was just a speed bump in the grand scheme of things. I probably wouldn't see her again, and even if I did, that would still be true. Allowing her actions, or anyone else's, to dictate my thoughts was exhausting. Sure, I'd never experienced something as direct as what she did, but I'd had more than half a dozen months to sit on it. I walked over to the bin in the open plan kitchen and tore up the letter, balling it up between my hands. Apology accepted.